Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
Place Beyond the Pines. Man, I'm bad at retelling stories. I gotta tell you the truth there. But it's one that has very unusual structure for a movie. It turns out to be multi-generational, and it's about starts out with. I mean, it's got a series of conflicts that play out particularly between a couple of families over those generations. But I mean, it's very unusual. When it starts out, you sort of think Ryan Gosling is going to be the central character. He's kind of a bleached blonde outsider, and he partway into the film gets shot and just occupies the screen for just a fraction of a second with Bradley Cooper, who then becomes kind of the main character from there. But then finally, it comes down to a conflict then between the sons of these two men. And they are kind of the final main characters of the story. So I wouldn't say it's got a clean three-part structure in that way, but it's Ryan Gosling and his romance with Eva Mendes at the beginning, and being in rivalry with a black man for her affections and loyalty in that part. And subsequently then it's about Bradley Cooper and his dealing with the fallout of having shot the Ryan Gosling character and concealing that fact from his son, and then the two sons gradually finding out the secret of their violent past and having to work that out. Yeah, boy, that's not a very good summary. Place Beyond the Pines.
I thought that served pretty well in terms of summing up a complicated movie. I was kind of glad to pass on that one because that is a difficult film to explain. As you said, it's not the usual straight line forward type of film that you would see. It's got some time jumps and all of that. As intergenerational conflict, it's a bit unusual. I guess the thing that I picked out first when you started, in my view, Ryan Gosling, Luke is his character's name. I think he's the central character even after he dies. Like, I think he only occupies about the first 50. This is kind of it's over 2 hours, longer film. He occupies physically the first 50 minutes of the film. I think he dies right at around the hour point, maybe a little less. But even from there forward, he continues to dominate the film, like all the way to the very end. I guess the one thing I would take issue with strongly in your synopsis, you described him as kind of a beach blonde outsider. Beach blonde, true, important, right? Let's keep that in mind. But man, that is like super minimizing. Like, this guy is a total terrorist. Like, is it what? Let me stop right there. Is that accurate to say he's a terrorist? Is that accurate?
That is accurate to say. Yeah.
Okay. Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Wednesday, March 14th, 2018. So I have been told, I don't know what part of the globe, the U.S. specifically, you are in. I know some folks are suffering with winter weather. It has been absolutely glorious in Seattle. It was really sunny last week. It was about a degree. It was almost 70 degrees on Monday, almost 70, and it's really pretty today. So hopefully we will have constructive information going down because the sun is still out, daylight saving times and all. So hopefully we will have constructive information this evening because Gus T and I'm sure some other folks could have been outside enjoying what almost feels like spring weather. In addition, still on my yoga path, been great. Took classes today, was able to do my first headstand. Felt great. Getting to serious business, first and foremost, we will be here tomorrow, Workplace Racism, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. If you have problems or have figured out some great codification for the job, dial in, let us know. Always look forward to Workplace Racism every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Broadcast for today. I'm sure some folks are disgruntled that we would have Dr. Kevorkian back on with us to discuss films and technology and to not make space for Black Panther. I can only say, again, that generally speaking, the types of films that I would be willing to watch and pay attention to and scrutinize are not films that have a lot of Black people in them. We've talked about that repeatedly. If it's a lot of Black people, I kind of expect it's going to be a lot of anti-Blackness and depictions that do not make me feel good about Black people, and that is the result of racism, white supremacy. But I will try and see if I can slip in maybe a question or two at the very end of the broadcast pertaining to Black Panther, just to get a quick thought from Dr. Kevorkian. The programs that or the films rather, that we're going to look at today, I picked, so if they are nonsense, don't make sense, waste of time, not really worth any value in terms of learning about the serious war of racism, white supremacy that is being waged right now, I would be 100% to blame. Dr. Welsing, again, as she always stated, every time she was on this program, reading is more important than watching television, reading and writing. If you want something to read, one book, in addition to the ISIS papers, that I think has constructive info, our guest authored, Color Monitors, The Blackface of Technology in America, I think applicable to at least half of the films that we're going to talk about today, at least half. Lots of interesting assessments of different films. I think a key portion or key theory argument of the book that in many films, narratives, if you want to think like Terminator, The Matrix, representations in these films or stories, the representations of machines or non-human entities, these are supposed to be metaphors for non-white people and white angst, white fears about non-white people and non-white people perhaps gaining control and disrupting the system of white domination in some way. That plays out in many of these films where you see machines and non-human entities running amok and causing problems, like in Black Mirror. Been with us many, many times over the 9 years that we have been broadcasting. Always a hoot to have him on the program. I know some of our listeners are grateful because they were able to get a copy of his book to check out to add to their library. Always great to get listeners counter-racist literature. Joining us live once again, our guest live from Texas, Dr. Martin Kevorkian. Dr. Kevorkian, are you with us again, sir?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for welcoming me back to the show, Mr. Renegade. And yeah, we'll try to have some constructive conversation. Again, you picked a great cluster of movies. One of the keys of education is syllabus design. What are the texts that you're going to put together? But again, I'll do my best to answer your questions. But as I was grateful you played that clip, because one of the other things it demonstrates is sometimes what you learn the most from me is what I missed. So that's definitely part of it. Yeah.
For sure. I think last time both of us missed a big one with what is it, Behind the Pine Forest. I think both of us missed a huge one that I kicked myself a few times after the broadcast. Not that I am trying to go back and rehash films, because we talked about so many movies and probably missed lots of things, but Behind the Pine Forest, Eva Mendes, Ryan Gosling. For people who haven't seen it, it's kind of the most complicated movie in the world. The only portion of it that you need to know to understand something that I think both of us missed. Eva Mendes and Ryan Gosling have a romance. They have a child together, but Ryan Gosling is a terrorist, as you heard in the audio clip. Ryan Gosling is a terrorist bank robbing thug, and so he gets her pregnant. He leaves to go do other terrorist things. Eva Mendes' character, she ends up with a black male character, and so they're together. They've been together for like a year, maybe even longer than that. Then Ryan Gosling comes back in the picture, and it's like, hey, let's be together. That's my child. And deadbeat dad, thug, terrorist comes back in and disrupts their happy home. The thing that we left out is really, 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 really important, unless I'm, totally wrong. Eva Mendes and Ryan Gosling are actually married in real life. To have them picked, a real authentic married couple, to have them picked as the romance that's, we missed, and, what if we could have made it work out and all this, but she's supposed to be paired with this black male, like, wow, like that just, I cannot believe we whiffed on that. Any thoughts, Dr. Kevorkian?
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, that I didn't know that to be the fact, but clearly, so audiences who are keyed into the culture of celebrity would be going in and definitely have that as a reason to root for and have positive feelings towards that romance, which otherwise the events on the screen make you root against Ryan Gosling. But I think that changes the way that, it emphasizes the way that people are supposed to sympathize with him, even when they really shouldn't.
Absolutely. The authentic couple would be the white-looking couple, not the one where you have someone who maybe could be a white person, Eva Mendes, with a black male. That's not the authentic one. The real husband-wife couple, the white family. The second thing, the audio segment that we heard there, I always think it's good anytime you're talking to a white person, even if you think that they might give constructive information and be honest about racism, white supremacy. If you are talking to a white person, your suspicion should be high in the system of white supremacy. Is that sound logic, Dr. Kevorkian?
Yes, it is, sir. Yes, sir.
With the minimizing of Ryan Gosling, and this is something that I think is extremely important because really predictably in the system of white supremacy, the terrorist acts of white people are greatly minimized, whitewashed, erased, sometimes even celebrated. And that's something that should be called out consistently. When you were giving your initial kind of commentary about Ryan Gosling's bleach blonde appearance and how he conducted himself in Behind the Pine Forest and greatly minimized his terrorist acts, could that have been an act of white supremacy racism on your part?
Yeah, it can take place consciously and unconsciously when you are within this regime. So, yeah, I like to think of myself as, I'm sure many people do, as someone trying to do their best, trying to figure things out. But I'm part of a long historical system that has obscured a lot of truths, and I don't always succeed in overcoming that by any means. So,
right on, Dr. Martin Kevorkian, University of Texas, Austin. The films we're talking about today, I'm saying films, but one of them is actually a Netflix series, so I guess that's a TV show kind of, so that, and then two films. Black Mirror, we talked about before. Dr. Kevorkian and I, he was with us 2016. I was a little nervous when I picked Black Mirror, more so because of the timing. We talked about Black Mirror, I think, within days of our current president winning in an election that I think most people were very surprised at the final results to end up with the individual we have in the White House now. So days after that, when the reverberations globally were still focused on what happened and can you believe it and who is this guy and Make America Great Again, we on the cows were talking about Black Mirror. So I did feel a little bit nervous about that, like, man, where are your priorities? But I emphasized we had already, or I will say I specifically, I don't know about Dr. Kevorkian, Gus T had predicted that Donald Trump was going to win months in advance, along with Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. I was not as early as she, but very early on I said Donald Trump was going to win System of White Supremacy, and it happened. Two, Dr. Kevorkian and I had talked about the Purge series in August, where I affirmed who I thought was going to win and used that film series to say, man, this is giving you a lot of evidence about what could go down in November. And I think we kind of emphasized that point quite a bit. I think the third Purge is election year that came out the same year as the Trump's triumph. We talked about that in August, so I felt like, hey, we were kind of early. We can celebrate. We can talk about Black Mirror because we were way ahead of the curve on this one. I said I thought Black Mirror would be very popular. It won 2 Emmys, historic for a Netflix series 1 and a TV series that is a British TV show. This was big news at the Emmys, not, historic in terms of ending racism, but important in the entertainment industry to have this series do so well and get so much critical acclaim. The 4th season just came out right at the end of 2017. Before we get to season 4, just your thoughts on this series winning 2 Emmys, and specifically it won an Emmy for one episode that you and I talked about quite a bit, the San Junipero episode, which features a quote-unquote tragic arrangement between a Black female and a white woman. Any thoughts on it in winning these 2 big awards?
Yeah, I mean that was one that, I think you most productively pointed out that it was kind of surprising that when it was reviewed as one of the, quote, upbeat episodes of Black Mirror, the sort of one of the ones that people are supposed to feel good about. When in fact, if you look at it critically, it's part of the same overall nightmare of what can happen when people's lives can be extended indefinitely and they're no longer in control of their identities. But in particular, it was an episode that featured a lot of the usual assumptions about Black people and about technology, namely that in that episode, it's all about the Black woman helping the white woman. I guess they want to celebrate it as this love story between equals, but as you help to critique it, it really was very much a story of inequality, and actually celebrating that relationship where the white woman demands the help of the Black woman, and in essence, that relationship trumping the Black woman's love for the memory of her Black husband. So again, which as in the Ryan Gosling story, there was the story of which of those episodes, which of those romances is being portrayed as the authentic one. In this case, it was the one with the white woman at the center of it, who is enjoying all the benefits of the help that she is getting in this new world. But yeah, I think an episode that's comparable, and I've heard people compare it in the new series. People have been referring to Hang the DJ episode, that kind of matchmaking episode, as another one in which people say, oh, this is one of those feel-good dark mirror stories. But it seems to me that it's all part of the same nightmare.
I would concur. I thought the same thing. I know some of our listeners who saw the fourth season of Black Mirror had a similar thought in the similarity between those two episodes. I think you had pointed out when we spoke previously that during season 3, that was the first season that Black Mirror was on Netflix, so they were looking to get broader appeal, more U.S. viewers. That episode in particular, I think you were saying that they were trying to find episodes that were not as gloomy in terms of how they ended, and that was one that they, I guess, thought would be received better by audiences, and the same thing with Hang the DJ. For a lot of reasons, I can see why people compare those two. Before I get to that episode specifically, and I probably won't go through every single episode from season 6. Like they're seems similar, I think, with Black Mirror. Like we went through a lot of the previous seasons, but I do want to talk a bit about Hang the DJ. Just overall impression from the 6 episodes from the 4th season of Black Mirror, main thoughts that came to mind in viewing it.
Yeah, well, you start out by talking about the importance of reading, and one book that I wanted to call attention to is by Professor Simone Brown. She's a professor at UT Austin in the Department of African and African Diasporic Studies. And Professor Simone Brown is the author of Dark Matters on the Surveillance of Blackness. And one of the things that this book does, it gives the historical context of, as she puts it, black bodies being turned into data. And this is a practice that goes back to the practices of slavery. She goes way back to the 18th century. She's looking at a 1783 document called the Book of Negroes, which contains these detailed descriptions of 3,000 escaped slaves, everything about their physical characteristics. And this is a book that former owners were trying to use to establish property rights over these escaped slaves. So I just mention her work as research that I think provides important context and historical background for a lot of the themes of Black Mirror in this season, which is often about having power over black bodies by turning them into data, by turning them into their digital representations, and being able to have a certain kind of control and ownership over them in that way. So if you want to learn more about the history of surveillance and how the history of slavery connects to digital biometric surveillance practices today, I recommend Professor Simone Brown's work.
Adding that to my reading list. I will investigate at the end of the program. What would your response be to those who say, wait a minute, Dr. Kevorkian, you're trying to pull a slick one. There are a lot of instances in the 4th season and previous seasons of Black Mirror where white people also have their consciousness uploaded digitally and are compromised and mistreated in lots of different ways. In fact, you have an episode here where one could argue that a black person has control of a white person's digital consciousness to do with what they want, put it on pause, stop it, put it in a teddy bear and that sort of thing, that it's not as one-sided as you present.
Yeah, I think that the episode you mentioned, the Black Museum, is one that goes out of its way to try to make the counter argument to say, look, this isn't just all about consistently presenting non-white bodies as the victim of this, and I think it's trying to be very conscious of that, and it's also, I'll say, if someone wanted to make a lateral comparison there. It features, I believe the actress's name is Letitia Wright, who also plays, what could be described as a strong character in Black Panther. And she's the one who sort of turns the tables at the end, and she has, so to speak, wins in a kind of a nightmarish, sadistic way, which is consistent with the kind of sadistic imagination of so much of this episode and so many of these episodes. But yeah, no, I think that the Black Museum is one that the final episode does try to make that case to say that this is not a one-sided instance. But even with that one, I think the kind of cruelty that is being put on display it's much longer and much more dramatized. In the case of the Clayton Lee black man who is found guilty of killing a white woman, it's kind of like the archetypal racist imagining. The episode seems to suggest that he's innocent, but he is turned into, he's turned into data in a way that allows people to punish him indefinitely in a way that is horrific. So yeah, I could see where people would point to that episode, but I would say that looking at the series as a whole, even the episodes that try to say that, yes, white people can be the victims of these same nightmares, if you look closely, you can still see the imbalances, you can still see the inequities in the ways that people are being treated. One that came to mind in particular, would it be okay to talk about the first episode, the USS Callister episode?
Oh, let's hear it. That was one of their flagship. I think that was the flagship episode of this season.
Yes, that's the one with which they launched the series, and it was also the first one that made me think of the importance of Simone Brown's work on the surveillance of bodies and reducing them to their digital essences as a way of controlling them. And this is an episode in which a white coder, a white game designer, has designed this immersive game called Infinity, but he's got his own private version of it, which is he calls it the Space Fleet modification, Space Fleet mod of this, in which he just keeps in his own computer space. And it's kind of like a knockoff of Star Trek. And in it, this private game that he's just designed as his own power fantasy, he gets to play the captain. But he uses this game to act out his power fantasies and revenge fantasies over all of his coworkers or anyone who has ever slighted him. Often people that he has actually done terrible things to, and the only thing they did wrong in his eyes, they simply retaliated or resisted. For example, there's a black woman, a coworker, Shania, played by the actress Michaela Cole, who says that the main character, Daly, tends to get a bit starey, and basically suggests that she was a victim of sexual harassment by him in the workplace, and because she didn't reciprocate or respond positive to him, he takes her identity and puts it into this game and punishes her within that game, along with several other characters. But if I could summarize, it's a little different. It's not just a purely digital stealing in this case. It's also, there's a kind of a direct biological component to it that involves the Daily character, the guy who's the coder, and then the fantasy captain in the Space Fleet game, taking people's DNA, taking it from their coffee cups, taking it from a lollipop, anything that would have their DNA on it, and then being able to generate somehow their consciousness within the game. But the key fiction of all of these, almost all of these Black Mirror episodes, is the idea that you could create a fully conscious version of a person and place it in a digital space, and they would think that they were themselves and be able to experience everything as a real person would. And the people who end up in this game are, as I said, this Shania, the black woman who resisted when he tried to sexually harass her. There's a guy who plays the helmsman, who's a black man named Nate, and he's someone who was an intern. That is someone who was expected to serve daily out in the office, and I think his crime was that he didn't bring the right coffee or somehow didn't fetch the right thing for the coder, and therefore he took his DNA and put him in the game where he's an underling, and he's also, it's clear in the game that he's always the one that is implementing the orders. The captain gives the orders, and then the helmsman does what the captain says. So he's still kind of playing that intern underling role. I think that the episode tries to talk about him being a victim of racial injustice in the real world, because it points out, he later realizes that even though he's been trapped in this game for a long time, he somehow finds out that he's still just an intern out in the real world, whereas other people have been getting advancement. So those are there are two black characters. There's a South Asian character whose name is Dudani, and he's a coder. He's someone who works directly under Daly, and Daly is always pushing him to get the patch done more quickly. And presumably, Dudani is being punished in this game because he didn't work quickly enough or didn't respond, with instant results for whatever Daly was ordering. There's a character, let's say his name is Walton, and he was the guy with whom, he's the only white man in the scenario, and he's the guy with whom Daly co-founded this gaming company. And Daly clearly resents him for having had more success and more control over the company. And so he likes to humiliate him in this game space. And then finally, there's the new woman who shows up at work and, like the black woman, also does not respond to the, romantic or sexual overtures, and therefore she gets put into the game. That's the Nanette character, who is the white woman. So that's all a lot of summary. But what I wanted to say about what I see as the imbalance or the inequity of this story and how it plays out is that it's dependent upon the white woman, who is the most recent arrival in the game, to lead the rebellion. And for me, the key insight, or the central, truth that she tells the other characters have all, for one reason or another, given up and accepted their fate as pawns in this cruel world of the Space Fleet game. And they say things like, well, there's nothing we can do. In this world, Daly is a god. And I think that's a key lie at the center of so much of the system of racism. The idea that the white person in power has taken over or usurped a kind of godlike role, presumes to be a deity. And I suppose that, probably what the episode seems to be going for is there's clearly a kind of feminist empowerment to the Nanette character, resisting that idea. But what he says, he's not a god, he's a coder. That is, he's just a programmer, and that means he's human, and that means we can beat him and we can defeat him. And she, in fact, plans and then leads an overthrow of this coder. But what that means is that there's a kind of a naturalization or identification between her status as a white character and not accepting the enslaved role, versus you have the black man the black woman, the South Asian man, and then, yes, one white man. But out of those other four characters, the white man is definitely the special case in terms of accepting his role of being enslaved within the game. The special case there is that Daly, the coder, has leverage over the white man because he also has access to a digital version of Walton's kid. And he's able to kill him in that virtual space or subject him to pain. And the episode goes to great lengths to show that he only gives up because he doesn't want to see his son suffer. Whereas you have these other characters who are basically accepting this role and not being part of a rebellious mindset. So the white man requires some sort of special leverage to accept his role in the game, and then it's the white woman who leads the revolt. And I think it would be, it could be a stronger episode. And to me, historically, it would make more sense if, in fact, it were some of the non-white characters who had that insight that he's not a god, he's a coder. One of the things that slave narratives and abolitionist literature show is how slave masters set themselves up as gods. False gods who are, and I'll use a phrase that I learned on this show, that are attempting to separate people from the creator. That's one of the stages of taking away someone's freedom, taking away someone's humanity, is to sever their relationship with the creator. And there's the idea that the slave master, historically, literal slave masters in this case, the game master, is setting himself up as a false god. And consistent with Simone Brown's research, slave owners used surveillance to achieve that effect. And one of the examples she talks about, it's a very notable example, is Frederick Douglass, the narrative life of Frederick Douglass. He analyzes how one of his slave masters, Covey, was like a snake, and he would appear unexpectedly, so that slaves never knew whether they were being observed or whether they were not being observed, and therefore they grew to believe that they were under continual surveillance. And because of this, creating this surveillance effect, Douglass says that Covey's power worked as effectively in his absence as in his presence. But Douglass sees through this, and he's the one who sort of has this insight. Yeah, this guy can be beaten. It's just a trick. So, to me, thinking about the example of slave narrative and the insights of stories of that nature, I think this could be a stronger episode if one of the non-white characters had the insight. He's not a god, he's a coder. Because in a sense, that would be one way of summarizing the history of slavery. The master is not a god. He's just a coder, and as Simone Brown shows, he's just a coder who's trying to turn people into data and program them as forced labor, as robots.
Context of White Supremacy, Dr. Martin Kevorkian. I think, great analysis in terms of assessing that the white woman who's placed in the infinity game leads the revolt. She's the one who's absolutely not. I am not going to accept this. We are going to resist. And the non-white characters, hey, nothing you can do. Just got to go along. The white man is God. And there is one other character, the white woman receptionist, who I guess also has rankled him. But interestingly, she has been turned purple, non-white, in that world. She also seems to just be going along, but she has lost her whiteness in the transition. So that would fit the pattern. Maybe she's, at any rate, I just think that's important. She is purple there, and she's also seemingly going along. She's not leading the resistance at first anyway, either. One of our listeners, when she saw the fourth season, this episode specifically, but she said one of her main takeaways was the kind of white woman being in a more authoritative role. She thought that was like her main takeaway from this season. This episode and quite a few others, you see white women in positions of power where they are leading in violence or leading in whatever is taking place in the episode. And that is true. I do see a lot of white women in active roles, but I feel like that's been the case throughout Black Mirror. I feel like if you've seen the first 3 seasons of the series, they have a lot of white women in very powerful. I think from the very beginning, the pilot episode where they have the rape of the pig, there's a white woman politician who seems to be very high up, if not the one that's kind of orchestrating what's going to happen all the way up to the rape of the pig. She's, one of the power players in that scenario. I think they have the first episode of season 2 where the white woman's husband dies. It's pretty much exclusively focused on her and how she's dealing with her grief process. I feel like Black Mirror consistently has white women, emphasis on white women, in authoritative roles, positions of power, whether they're villains, heroes, whatever the case may be. The thing that stood out to me in season 4 is the violence. Not that Black Mirror didn't have violence before, but much more, much more direct, graphic violence. Wow, like what you described in the first episode, USS Callister, that's a form of violence, uploading people's consciousness and stealing their biological information. The way he stole, I think, the child's lollipop to get his information to kind of make his father cooperate and not rebel in the program. But lots of just direct violence. I'm thinking Metalhead, the episode where it starts off, I think within the first 10 minutes, and this episode is in black and white. You see 3 characters, black male. He gets stung in the face with like tiny needles with sensors on them. He gets shot, falls off a ladder, and then he gets shot again. And this is within like the first 10 minutes of the episode. And then within the first 20 minutes, you see another person get their head blown off. And just repeated episode after episode, except for the Hang the DJ, direct violence, seeing a white woman bash a black male's head open with a hammer, repeatedly, bang, bang, listening to her take a blunt object and crush a non-white female's skull, just repeated direct violence. I think Charlie Brooker in Black Mirror in the first 3 seasons, at least in my view, violence was there, but it was not used as explicitly as much, and it certainly was not as integral to the plot of stories. The episode that I mentioned, The Entire History of You, that's the first episode of season 2. White woman's husband dies. You never see it. There's no violence. You get the same thriller technology spin on it without all the gore and gush. Season 4, it was just bloodshed, white violence. Even let me make sure I'm explicit. White violence, graphic white violence, episode after episode. Your thoughts, Dr. Kevorkian?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, I think it's an episode. I mean, I think it's a series that overall has been overpraised simply by adopting a kind of a hateful and sadistic worldview, a worldview that takes a dim view of humanity in general. But that within that particularly highlights instances and depicts instances of white violence. And I think Crocodile was the episode 4.3 with that. I'm not even really sure why it was called Crocodile, by the way. But where the woman, in order to, protect herself, to cover up her crimes, it's a kind of an endless game of can you top this in terms of how far will she go, how much violence will she commit, and how innocent will the victim be? And the answer is there's no limit to the violence that she will pursue in order to keep herself safe from accusation that she, as you say, commits violence against this South Asian woman, who's just doing her job, and then goes and kills that woman's husband, who's a black man, with a hammer, and then finally kills their child because it's a world in which memories can be harvested, and so she believes she can't afford to leave any witnesses whatsoever. The episode tells you that there's a kind of cruel irony in that the child was born blind so that he wouldn't have seen her anyhow. So it's a kind of a gratuitous killing. But it goes out of a way to show her as having no limit to the kind of monstrous brutality that she will perform. But in terms of this being new, I wanted to address the question. I think it's more so in this episode, but I was just doing a little digging. And one of the things that Charlie Brooker did a long time ago, before he created Black Mirror, was he was a cartoonist. And there's a kind of infamous cartoon that he did way back in 1998. So I guess that's 20 years ago. It was a cartoon that he did for a magazine called PC Zone. And the title of the cartoon was called Helmut Wurster's Cruelty Zoo. And I mean, he always thinks that he's got a critique in mind. In this case, he initially had titled the cartoon Laura Croft's Cruelty Zoo. It was supposed to be a critique of Tomb Raider and the cruelty to animals that takes place consistently in the game Tomb Raider, that video game. So he's someone who's been studying gaming and sort of the violence of gaming for a long time. Again, that comes out in the USS Callister episode. But in this Helmut Wurster's Cruelty Zoo, it depicts a fictional zoo made by this cruel Germanic doctor in which children are encouraged to act out their violent impulses on animals. And it was graphically depicted. It was one of the things that it caused some issues of the magazine to be pulled from the shelves. But one of the disturbing images showed a young white boy. The frame says, "We don't like monkeys around here." And it shows a white boy smashing the head of a monkey with a hammer. And so that was an infamous image that was, from way back in, Charlie Brooker's imagination of this white boy smashing the head of a monkey with a hammer. And I feel like that violent imagination came bubbling back up to the surface with Crocodile. It seems like it's a repeat of that imagery. In the case of the Cruelty Zoo, it was violence against this monkey. In the case of the Cruelty Zoo, in the case of Crocodile, violence against the non-white human body.
That relationship between monkeys and black people, I think I've seen talked about that a few times before. I guess two quick points I wanted to get in about the fourth season that came out. I definitely had a question or thought on Hang the DJ, but also a thought to the Black Museum episode. I've heard people talk about that. In fact, the Washington Post, they did an article praising this episode and saying that it was calling attention to racial injustice with the justice system and how easily black people can end up wrongly on death row and, subjected to all kinds of just unfortunate treatment, and saying that they did a great job in bringing some of these facts to light in a way that hadn't been done before. What I thought was, I remember the episode Nosedive. That's episode 1 from season 3. The episode Bryce Dallas Page. She is on social media and she runs into a lot of problems with black people, and they rate her down on social media. In this episode, if you get rated harshly on social media, you could lose your job or housing, lots of things. You could, end up homeless if social media goes wrong. But it reminded me of that episode in that when we talked about it, I said that I think this could represent some authentic white fears about black people, non-white people on the whole, using technology to somehow usurp white power or undermine white supremacy in some way. When I saw the Black Museum episode, and I mean, talk about gratuitous violence all throughout this episode in a myriad of ways. But when I saw this episode and Letitia Wright, who's in Black Panther, she is able to get vengeance on this white male doctor who runs this museum kind of set up, the Black Museum. She's able to get vengeance on him. He has abused her father. Clayton is his name, black male. He's on death row in the series. He's kind of the big centerpiece in his museum presentation. The final act, you get to see the digital upload of Clayton and see him suffer, and you can pull the lever on the electric chair and see him suffer and all that. But to see her use all of this technology and this elaborate scheme to finally get him back, to me, it reminded me of Nosedive, that, see, black people, they're going to get all this technology, and which is what this is about anyway. The technology, what it could do, how it could undermine our authority or control, or the technology could somehow not be the gift that it's supposed to be, and particularly with your angle, color monitors, black people, the relationship to machines, using that technology to, because I looked at the things that happened in that episode in the vignette, whether it's the black male getting the kind of pseudo-lobotomy, having his white partner's consciousness put inside his brain, and what happens to Clayton, certainly all of these types of things. White people do these things all the time. There's no guilt, there's no remorse, and there's certainly no vengeance. So for these type of things to somehow now be punished by a black person, where, no, you can't just treat black people with impunity and do whatever you want practicing white terrorism. They could get us back using all this newfangled technology. I've seen that before in this series. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, that makes entire sense. I mean, I think that the Nosedive episode has connections to a couple of these episodes. I hadn't thought of it in connection here, but I think that is right, that there's a fear of the association between blackness and technology being something that can turn against white power. And I think it certainly explains the nature of the ending of the Black Museum episode, to think of it particularly as an instance of white fear about black and non-white people gaining power through technology. Because, I mean, to my mind, there's something very strange about the way it plays out, that you see this Letitia Wright character who is a crusader for justice. She's wanting to expose, do all those things that the Washington Post is talking about. And I think the episode does put some of that history definitely on display of injustices that non-white people experience, being disproportionately accused, convicted, and executed for capital crimes. That history is very much being written into there. But there's something about the way it all plays at the end, in which essentially the Letitia Wright character is portrayed not just as getting justice, but as really being just as sadistic as the horrible white character that we've grown to hate over the course of the whole episode. There's this sort of the loathsome Rollo Haynes character. We see that he has no conscience, and that he is willing to engage in all this sadistic behavior, particularly with regard to Clayton. But then at the end, we're supposed to imagine that this daughter who is trying to achieve, yes, vengeance and yes, justice, is literally going to derive pleasure from watching him suffer. And not only is she going to derive pleasure from it, but now her mom has been implanted into her consciousness, and so she's kind of sitting in this armchair and spectating and smiling and enjoying the spectacle as this loathsome white man is put in a state of perpetual agony. I guess it strikes me that, for all of her being this crusader for justice, that doesn't cast her in what I would call a very noble light. But I think it's a light that is best understood understood in the context that you provided, wherein she is an enactment of a white fear about Black power, rather than an authentic crusader for Black justice.
I also think it's significant that the only people that you see getting this, I'm calling it's a digital lobotomy, basically having someone else planted in your head. You only see Black people, and something about that just struck with me that I think pretty consistently from the bell curve and down through the years. It's been argued that Black people are unintelligent, ignorant. During Frederick Douglass's era, it was illegal to read. He could have been killed for learning how to read. So it seems very symmetrical that these Black people somehow would have the extra space in their head, that you're not using that much of your brain capacity anyway. You have the room to, we could fit another person. I think Rollo's character even tells that to the Black male, that, we don't even use our head, that's being said to a Black person, that you don't even use the full capacity of your brain. So, sure, we could probably stuff, 2, 3, 8, 12 people. And that's not being directed at a white character, that's being directed at a Black person, and then you see 2 Black people that have had this done to them, either voluntarily or they've been coerced or however it happened. I also wanted to point out, switching episodes quickly, and definitely getting to downsizing in Suburbicon, switching episodes to Hang the DJ. I do think it's very similar to San Junipero for people who've seen season 3 of Black Mirror. With the tragic arrangement that we talked about earlier. You can go back and hear our previous conversation. The Hang the DJ episode, I was not surprised that this was one of the most popular episodes of the season from just comments that I read online, and it seems like it got a lot of great reviews. Maybe this will be the one that they submit when award season comes around. When I saw this, it reminded me of that episode. First and foremost, you again have a really attractive Black female and a dorky white person. This time it's a dorky white male. Instead of last time around, it was a dorky white female. But a dorky white male, in my view, that is not Gus's subjective assessment. If you watch the episode, you have a white male who, the first time you see him, he's dropping silverware on the floor. He gets his genitals ridiculed during the act of sexual intercourse. He's just not he chokes on food in the middle of meeting someone. He's just not presented as the dashing, handsome character in a film that all of the females are drooling over and just hoping will ask them out. This is not that guy at all. For the second time to have a very attractive, non-white female, Black female actress paired in some sort of romantic way with a dorky white person, that was one. Then as the episode proceeds, one of the patterns, I think, the sexualization of Black females in particular in Black Mirror, I think that happens a lot. I think we talked about the episode in season 3 with Stripe. The episode, I think it's episode 5 of season 3, where they have troops that are going out to kill roaches, and the reward if you kill a roach is you get some sort of uploaded sexual fantasy. And with the Black character Stripe in season 3, his sexual fantasy, he kills 2 roaches and he gets like a female cloned. He gets to have sex with a Black female who's been cloned, so it's like 8 of her. Exactly the same, having sex with 8 of her all at one time, and that's supposed to be a great thing. That, and then with what happens in Hang the DJ, the Black female character, she goes out on the first date with this white guy. And it's a dating service, so you're supposed to date lots of people, and then the computer hooks you up with your perfect match after you've done all this dating. So she goes out with a white guy, and then she goes out with all these other people, tons of them, and you see frame after frame of her being in the bedroom, very sexually suggestive, in lingerie, what you would wear at night, about to have sexual intercourse, with lots and lots of white guys. They even throw in a non-white guy. They throw in a white female as well, which I thought was hugely significant. They don't do that for her white male counterpart, her ultimate love. They don't do that for him. They show him with 2 other partners, One time he's being ridiculed about his poor performance in bed, and the other time he's complaining about his long lost black female love that, they broke up, they're not together at that time, so he's complaining about her. That you don't see him in an endless parade of sexual activity with female after female after female. It's just the black female who's shown in all of this sexual activity. And in fact, at one point later in the episode, she says that she was watching herself and it just felt like watching a penis going in and out of a hole. Her having sexual intercourse with all of these different partners that you've already seen. Those were two major things that stood out. And then again, to only emphasize to get to the end, and this is a happy ending, that yes, we have a match, this black female, your perfect match is this white man. To have a gorgeous black female, your 98.9 or whatever it is, perfect match is this dorky white guy. Only in the system of white supremacy could that be the case. And that is the one happy episode that we're supposed to applaud. Two times that we should be happy. Some sort of quote unquote interracial relationship, in my view, that is once again not balanced. Did you have thoughts on this episode, Hang the DJ?
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts. The first one is really just a footnote to your first thought about the overwhelming way in which this episode is consistent with the sexualization of the non-white female. This is just a minor point, but it's consistent with the San Junipero episode, where you actually picked the clip where the white woman says to the black woman, "You have to help me." Like the white woman is the one who is awkward about things like romance and sex, and so she demands that the black woman initiate and guide her in this romance or sexual experience. It's a subtle thing, but even on the very first date where this dorky white guy goes out with a non-white woman, she's the one, when they're lying next to one another in bed, that she reaches out and she initiates contact with him. So it's a situation where it's not going to happen, but for his fantasy to come true, she's going to do the work. She's the one that's going to reach out. She's the one that's going to risk taking that first step. So that's another part of that fantasy where the sexualization is made to reside in the non-white body. And that's consistent within that turns out that is within one of the many, many simulations. Like they had 1,000 simulations of their relationship, and that was just one of them. But the very final scene of the episode, you see them meeting in real life, and they've gone through this whole thing on the dating app. The dating app has run all these simulations for them, which we've seen dramatized. And now, because it says that they're a good match, you see that she takes the step towards him. So again, he's just kind of across the bar looking awkward again, and you see that she smiles, and now she's going to make the move on him. So to me, it was consistent with that fantasy with the white woman and the black woman in San Junipero, where the demand is, you have to help me. That she's the one who's expected to take that step. And I thought it was ironic, and it kind of undercut itself, because the whole idea of, the true romance was that it was supposedly one that was based on an impulse of freedom. The way that this app, this kind of dating application, determines whether someone is a match is by putting digital versions of them into this kind of totalitarian world, in which everyone has to do what the system says. And if they are, true, authentic match romance partners, then they will rebel against the system. Okay, so that's within the app, within the simulation. And so in this case, out of 1,000 simulations, 998 of them rebelled, and that proves that they're a true match. But then the real world result of that is then the non-white woman does what the system says, right? So supposedly she proved that she was that these guys were matches because she helped them rebel in the simulation. But in the real world, she's holding this app in her hand, and it's saying, this guy is your match, go to him, and she's just simply following that directive. she is now being controlled by the system, which supposedly she was, a good match because she rebelled against it. But in real life, she's not. She is the one who's being acted upon by that system. So I guess maybe the final thing that made me think just a little bit at the end of Nosedive, it seems to me that there's a kind of toxicity in these relationships, even when they're portrayed and we're supposed to feel good about them. The way Nosedive ends is with the Bryce Dallas Howard and the non-white man having a sort of a meet-cute moment in jail, in which consists basically just of them insulting one another. And actually that's the basis of this true romance in Hang the GJ, if you really look at it, that there's not, it's supposed to be read, I think, as cute and charming, but pretty much all these two people do is insult one another, and that seems to be the basis of something like an authentic romance in this imagined world.
That is
one basic effect. Yeah.
That is a great point. They do pretty much just exchange insults throughout their simulated time together is pretty much just a collection of exchanged insults. Even when they're not dating, when they just bump into each other, it still just turns into a lot of insults. Again, this is the only happy episode from the 4th season of Black Mirror. Any other parting shots you want to get in Black Mirror before we transition to downsizing in Suburbicon?
Maybe there's just one point. It's just a couple of very peripheral non-white characters. You pointed out that sometimes you learn the most from just these minor characters, not where there's a whole bunch of black characters front and center. And it was just black characters being expected to perform helping roles and then not receiving payment for it or not receiving thanks for it. It happens in episode 4.2, Archangel, where it's the mother and the little girl. And the first time she loses the little girl, it's because she was talking to a black woman and her child, and her little white girl runs away, and it's a black man who goes and retrieves the girl for her and brings her back. And it was just so striking to me that she didn't even thank him, that this was just expected, that this would be his role. Like, he's part of, in effect, he's almost exchanged later for the Archangel technology. So, first time she loses her little white girl, there's a black man there to bring her back, but she decides that she's going to go with a technological solution to track everywhere that her little girl goes. So there's a kind of equivalence between the unthanked black man and the technology that's supposed to do that work for her. The other character that's just kind of a minor character that way, it was a real-life character, not a video game character in the USS Callister episode. The black man who's known only as Pizza Guy. And he's promised some big $30 tip if he can get a pizza there in 10 minutes. And that's part of the scheme of rebellion that's hatched by the white woman. And it depends on him getting that pizza there. And that's actually the thing that saves them, but he never gets paid. He's just been tricked into providing that help and to providing that labor that actually enables the whole liberation plot. But he remains the unthanked and uncompensated pizza guy who did his job and got nothing for it.
I remember that scene. I remember that. That's the same pizza company, I think, from the Crocodile episode where they have the car wreck. But yeah, black people helping and not being thanked, compensated, or just expected to help white people. Again, that is why in Context of White Supremacy, I do say consistently, one of the things that we could do to work against white supremacy racism, stop helping white people. Transitioning, even though I think there probably will be one resurface of Black Mirror before we call it quits. Transitioning to downsizing and Suburbicon. If you have questions on Black Mirror or anything else related to what we've been discussing, the number is 641-715-3640 and the code 564943#. press star 61 if you would like to participate. Now, with these two films, again, Gus T would be the one to blame if you don't find any constructive value or you just think this is nonsense. We could have been enjoying the beginning of spring 2018. These two films came out at the same time, starring the same person, Matt Damon, lead role. Stood out for many reasons. Suburbicon is directly about racism, white supremacy. Downsizing is not, even though it is there, in my opinion. Wow. I can only say we'll, I guess, discuss these two films independently. And then once we're done, if you have not seen these films, perhaps after we've discussed them, you'll come to the same conclusion that I did, that, wow, these are very similar films. Even, yes, they do have the same actor, but I mean beyond that. These are very, very similar films to come out at the exact same time. How curious. I just wanted to think more on it, and now we'll have Dr. Kevorkian to give his thoughts if he sees some of the same similarities. We can start with Downsizing, kind of discourse on that a bit, then go over Suburbicon, and then after we've discussed them both, can kind of see if there are some similarities in these films beyond the fact that Matt Damon is the lead in both. With Downsizing, I guess we can do the same thing that we did last time around. If you want to give a synopsis, less than 3 minutes for Downsizing for folks who haven't seen it, and then I'll take Suburbicon.
All right, I'll give it a shot. As you say, Downsizing, 2017. Directed by Alexander Payne, and I could comment maybe on a couple of those other films if that's helpful, but the context that is provided at the beginning is that the process known of downsizing is an invention about shrinking the human scale for some people in the name of what's called sustainability. That it's presented that since the 1950s there's been an overpopulation threat, and I'll just say that often there are racist overtones, sometimes explicitly so, even eugenics overtures when people start talking about, oh, there's too many people in the world. Sometimes what's being imagined is too many non-white people. So right away. That's a possible context for this red flag of overpopulation that this technology of shrinking people is designed to address. So the situation is that people are presented with the idea that they can be shrunken and moved into any one of a series of these idealized little suburb-like communities that are perfectly safe. And even if they don't have a ton of money in the real world, they can live like kings in this diminished scale, that their dollars will go much further. I can't remember what the ratio is, like $150,000 in the real world, which is what the Matt Damon's character's savings are, can be $12.5 million. So he decides he's going to do it at the last minute. His wife, however, pulls out, and so he's stuck in this downsized world together with a bunch of people that he doesn't know, and apart from his wife. So it's sort of immediately portraying him in that sympathetic way of someone either whose wife has been unfaithful or is not with him in some way. And the movie consists of him trying to figure out and make his way in this downsized world. It ultimately hinges on him befriending a non-white, a Vietnamese woman, non-white character, and trying to work for some sort of a larger justice. But I'll say that just one last thing, that the first thing you see this idealized, mostly white neighborhood, and one of the questions it raises is, who built all this? And I will say one of the things that that downsizing does make explicit is that, yes, even in this shrunken world, that ideal suburb is dependent on the labor of non-white people who were also downsized and live outside the walls in these sort of slums. So I see I overran my time, so I apologize.
We Will Live. Think that quality assessment. What do you make of the title? I know most people, when they hear downsizing, they tend to think of someone's going to be losing a job, or maybe many someones will be losing a job, but they are kind of playing with that. What do you make of the title of the film?
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually, that's right. That's what I thought when I first read it, was that it was going to be about, what they call corporate downsizing, which is exactly a lot of people losing their jobs. And I guess this is a kind of literal downsizing that's meant to address the same sort of economic pressures, that instead of downsizing and losing your job, you downsize, you lose your size, and you can get by without having that job. You now have enough money to live on within this new world of leisure, a world of leisure that nevertheless does turn out to still be dependent on the invisible labor of non-white people.
I thought it was fascinating, significant even in the tiny little itty bitty leisure land, the system of white supremacy still has white people living in their great big wonderful mansions and lavish condos and such, and non-white people still have to take like 50 buses to the outskirts to live in little itty bitty ghetto like shacks. Even when you have been scaled down, the system of white supremacy is replicated on a miniature level. I guess the first time when I watched the film, and I was thinking downsizing, and then I saw it and was like, oh, okay, shrinking people? I've watched it with friends, and we watched the whole shrinking process where they come in with spatulas and scoop you up like a little chocolate chip cookie and put you on a thing, and we're watching, and it was just like, man, I think by the time we watched it was 2018. It's 2018. They don't have better special effects to show the whole shrinking process. Like, you don't really get to see a lot of cool visuals and somebody going from 6 feet all the way down to 5 inches and all this other stuff. Is just kind of behind a door, and you hear a little bell, and boop, all done. They're shrunk down. Why do you think they went so low tech with the shrinking process?
I'll say I hadn't reflected on that, but I will say that in terms of the people who are portrayed at the threshold of the shrinking process, there are non-white people that are foregrounded at those points that are almost there, almost instead of the special effects. That there is a non-white, there's a black saleswoman who introduces Matt Damon to this concept and sort of sells him on it. And I think the first thing that happens when he wakes up when he wakes up or right before he goes to sleep, but there's a black nurse that is helping the process along. So in a sense, instead of portraying, the fancy technology itself, it's portraying the laborers who are in support of this technology. Another thing that you see, and you don't really know you're in the downsized world right away, is right after the first transition, you see, I think, about 4 black men together, and they're kind of joking around, and they're like orderlies at a hospital, kind of health workers, and you see them kind of joking around, having a good time. And then it zooms out, and you see a huge white woman's face looking in on them, and you see them shrunken and reduced and contained with respect to her. So that, that's one of the first times that feeling of scale is achieved. So rather than showing, a human body being gradually shrunken incrementally and going through that whole process, rather you wake up in a world where the first thing you see are a bunch of black men, and then you immediately see that they are tiny. And that sort of stands in for that effect.
Yeah, when the question was asked, I hadn't thought about it too much, but I've had time to think on it. And the more I thought on it, I felt like they have some pretty well-known actresses in this film, and they probably could have figured out a budget if they wanted to spend more on special effects to show it, but I don't think that's where the focus of this film is supposed to be, on special effects and whatnot, even though it is kind of sci-fi film with what it's talking about. I think it's more about the drama and the feeling and maybe even the angst, unless I am misreading, of some white people, maybe the same white angst that ushered that guy into the White House that we talked about previously. The white angst of feeling that lost job or economic insecurity, or if it's population control, because that is a core part of what this plot is about, threat of non-white populations either encroaching on this area. I think that wall is still a big topic, and immigration still seems to be a big issue, both here and internationally, complaining about non-whites immigrating to areas, immigrating to predominantly white areas, and there being a lot of hand-wringing and people grappling about this. These seem to be some topics that many white people seem to be very angry about. I thought it was more to address that feeling, address that angst, as opposed to being really sci-fi about all this, unless I have missed my guess. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, I think it, in contrast to being a sci-fi scenario, it's perhaps because it has a kind of a nostalgia for another system that it doesn't foreground that scienciness of it. I'll say another, like the hot button topics that is often, racial code is a big selling point for the downsized world that they say about it is that crime is zero, which is also sort of another sort of code of white flight. You talked about these kind of palatial estates that these sort of not so wealthy white people now get to live in and sort of play out that fantasy. I'm not an architecture expert, but it seems to me like with their columns and everything, it harkens also back to a plantation architecture. I mean, that's something that's not, looking to the future. That's something that's looking to the past. There was one, comment that I heard. You would allow me to kind of go off on a tiny bit of a historical tangent. I recently heard an interview on the radio with a man whose name was Dick Heller, and he was the plaintiff in a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court in 2008, known as Heller versus the District of Columbia. And it had to do with Second Amendment rights to bear handguns. Heller was a guy who, in D.C., was a kind of a special forces cop, sort of a security guy, and he wanted to have the right to bear arms, contrary to a 1975 law in District of Columbia that limited the use of firearms. And one of the things he talked about, he lived in Southeast D.C., and he talked about his neighborhood being transformed and wanting to be able to defend himself. And I think when he's talking about his neighborhood being transformed, what he means is that there's a bunch of non-white people moving into it, and therefore he has this angst, he feels this threat, he feels like he needs to be able to defend himself in a violent way. And, in 2008, it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court voted 5-4 that he was in the right, that the law in the 1975 law in D.C. that limited the use of handguns was going to be overturned, and that people like Heller would have their handgun rights. So I tell all this story because recently, right after Donald Trump was elected, this man Dick Heller was being interviewed near the White House, and there were protesters who were protesting against the election of Donald Trump around them, and Heller was wearing a cap, he said, that said, "Make America Free Again." So it was a riff on the Donald Trump "Make America Great Again." Again, this is golden age thinking. Make America Great Again is hearkening back to a golden age, of course, that never was. Like, make things the way they were. Make America free again. And this guy, Dick Heller, when he would see these protesters, he'd say, "What, you don't like freedom? Don't you like freedom?" That was his only line. Until he ran into a group of black men who were protesting the election of Donald Trump. And this is a direct quotation. This is what he said to them. This is just on the day after the election, he said, "See you on the plantation." And the interviewer who's talking to Dick Keller says, like, "Why did you say that?" And he tries to explain it. He says, "Oh, when they take away our Second Amendment rights, it's like we're all going to be living in a condition of slavery and the government will have power over us." But the guy says, "No, I mean, why did you say it to those black people?" And he evades the question and says, "Oh, well, let's go get some food over here." But I think there is, in terms of that angst that you're talking about, Mr. Renegade, that put Mr. Trump in the White House, I think you can see it in some of this fantasy of this downsizing world, and I think there is a little bit of that "see you on the plantation" mentality. That quotation from Dick Keller, but I think you see it in the architecture, and I think you see it in this fantasy of it being a crime-free zone. Just as Dick Keller saw that his neighborhood, as he understood it, was being threatened and could no longer be that.
Wow, that's a great point. I think just in the presentation, like you already mentioned, I'm not sure what their position is, but they're kind of like orderlies at a hospital. It was lots of black people in a film that does not have really very many black characters at all that have like speaking roles where they're on the screen doing something, not very at all. It's a white dominated film, but you do see a lot of black people in the whole downsizing process the whole way through. In fact, that's even a Color Monitors moment, I thought, the black female who's doing the whole selling of this down. Yeah, come to Leisureland. It's great. Back when they're married, she's got her little tablet and everything. Like they've got her safely secured. And then when you see the black males, they've got the huge white woman's face on the screen where she's bigger than like all 20 of them combined. But that is, I think that's the way it's presented in the film. That would seem to be a part of the selling point, that you can come to Leisureland and have the entire process, have all of these non-white people doing all of this labor for you, because they make that a big point of it as well. In Leisureland, most of the people don't work, so you can have non-white people like Ngoc Lang Tran come and clean your house and clean the lawn and whatever else has to be done to keep the little tiny place going, like that feel. And in fact, even I think the plantation thought is there in so many different ways on a subtle level. Like, do you remember the scene at the bar when the white guy is yelling at them and he's like, are you all getting small? And he's talking to Matt Damon and his wife, Audrey. He's like, you all looking small? Okay. Do you think you should have the same vote as everybody else? And he says, yeah, why not? And they go back and forth. He's like, you don't buy anything. You don't contribute to the economy. I think you should have maybe, I think he gave a percentage, and it was something close to 3/5. And I even put a little asterisk there, like, boop, they're just kind of putting it close enough on your mind so you're thinking about it, in my view. I could be in error. But also thought just the whole, with the white angst, I think Matt Damon's character is presented as so pathetic. And again, this is the same thing. This is not Gus reading like the guy as a dork in Black Mirror. That's the story. They are portraying him as a dork. They call him pathetic in Downsizing. Matt Damon's character gets, they don't even get his name right. His name is Paul Safronic. They botch his name about every 10 minutes. Somebody mispronounces his name. And it's not even just his last name. Sometimes they can't even get Paul right. They call him Pete and everything else. They start the movie and he's living in his raggedy house with his mom. I don't even think he's married at that point. She dies, and then he gets married, and he's still in the same raggedy house with his wife. They show his loan getting denied. Like, I think the character that is presented, at least from what I read, what I hear, the explanations that I hear from people trying to explain why we have the president that we do currently, is that there are a lot of white people, particularly white males, who are in this position or feel very close to this position and are very disgruntled about their state in life. And it seemed like this movie was supposed to be directly speaking to them and whatever their fears are about all of that. That stood out. And then even once you get to Leisureland, how all of that is supposed to be reaffirmed. At least it seemed to me that the sexual relationship with a non-white female is a part of the reaffirming of his manhood, Matt Damon's manhood in this character, Paul Safronic. What would your take on that be?
Yeah, no, I think that's all true, that they try to make him sympathetic by showing that his white status is being undermined. That that can be a diagnosis of that anxiety that you're talking about. That people there are some white people that are fearing the idea of losing white privilege, and that his humiliation is part of that, and that even having this romantic relationship with a non-white woman is sort of a way of reclaiming that. But I thought I definitely thought that the allusion to the fractional vote definitely seemed like an allusion to that, famous flaw in the Constitution, because it was stated, whatever the fraction was, it was stated as a fraction. And anytime you talk about, counting a fraction of a person, that seems to be an allusion to the status of Black people in America historically in that counting manner. But another thing that was said about when he gets there, the I guess he's a French character. I first read him as Germanic, but the Christopher Waltz character, Duchamp, he says the worst trait about small people is they're lazy. So there's a kind of a stereotyping there of these downsized individuals. But even as you point out, the way that they butcher his name, I wondered also if there was a loss of white status there, because his name is Safronic. But one of the things people keep saying is saffronic, like the word saffron. And the first few times he corrects them, but it's a year, then it shows time lapses a year later, and someone calls him saffronic, and he says, "That's me." And saffron is a color; it's a non-white color. It's the idea that he has been graded to not from white status, now he is saffron status. Maybe that's reading too much into it, but I don't think it's too much to read in, at least what you have said, that there is a kind of disrespect paid to him by the fact that they can't even get his name right. And that definitely plays into the white discontentment that we have seen manifested in the election.
Oh, absolutely. I think in terms of him losing his white status, I think that's a correct reading. I think the voting comment, the name, because that's something we talk about on this program all the time. That seems to be a cliche act of white supremacy, racism. In my purposeful mispronunciation of non-white titles or butchering or nicknames or whatever. They're just any form of disrespect to what your correct name and title is. It seems to be lots of that, in my view, kind of questioning his white status, which kind of getting at that white angst, I think that people have been talking about in this part of the world for some time. Do you sense any imbalance in the relationship that Matt Damon's character has with the non-white female?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it sort of shows him as, in a way, being overwhelmed by her. I mean, she initially shows up in the subservient role. She works for a cleaning crew called Jade Palace, which is kind of this deliberately exotic, Asian stereotypical name. And she speaks in that kind of clipped way. She says, "We come to clean for you." So immediately she's presented in a subservient role, but pretty soon, basically, he's working for her. He tries to help her out with her prosthetic leg, and he ends up messing that up and breaking it, and can't get a replacement for her. So then he feels guilty and ends up doing work for her. So in a way, the fact that he has this romance relationship is a kind of stereotypical kind of white guy, you could call it sexual tourism or something of that nature, but it's also the case that comically he is shown as just kind of going along with whatever she says. He now becomes part of her project. So I wasn't sure how to read that, but it did seem to continue that idea that he has lost status.
To me, it It just seems, like I said before, the replication of racism, white supremacy, and as you said, the sexual tourism. His wife who abandons him as they're going to get small. The way it plays out in the film, they're kind of together at the center where you're supposed to be downsized, and they embrace, and he leaves, he goes, he gets small, and he thinks that she's going to be coming into the room together so they can recuperate and go off to their little miniature life of leisure. And he gets a call like, oh, nah, I couldn't do it. I'm backing out. I'm still big, and I'm not going to do it. And so he's been abandoned. Like I said, pathetic loser white guy. This non-white female, even though exactly as you said it, the way that the film presents it, he's kind of bungling and just going along and doing work for her and getting kind of teased and ridiculed the whole way through as people see him, dragging a vacuum cleaner and sweeping and mopping and all this with her entirely non-white cleaning crew. Even the cleaning crew is laughing and mocking at him at times as this is going on. Absolutely true, but it just, by the time you get to the end, Matt Damon seems like he is in a much better, his white masculinity seems to be in a better place than where we were at the start of this film when he was single and living with his mom. Based I would say to a large degree on now he's in this relationship with Ngoc Lang Tran. Like even though almost the way I would look at it as, even if you are a white man and your status has been jeopardized, maybe you don't have as much money, maybe whatever your aspirations in life were. He was supposed to be a doctor, he was in med school, had to drop out, physical therapist. Whatever your aspirations were, however clipped or however short you may have fallen from them, you can still practice racism, white supremacy. You can still engage in a little sexual tourism. Maybe it's on a smaller scale, but you can still practice racism, white supremacy in the world and be okay with that. Like, that's almost the way it seemed to read to me. Is that too much? Is that reasonable?
I think it's reasonable, and I think it's consistent with some things that I found disturbing in a previous Alexander Payne movie, which was Sideways. I don't know if you took that in, but it was a movie that white people loved because it was about touring the wine country and Napa Valley and all that. But one of the things that it revolves around is it's Paul Giamatti and Thomas Hayden Church are kind of going on a road trip. Thomas Hayden Church is this white scoundrel who's finally going to settle down and get married, but he wants to have one more wild weekend in the wine country. And what he does is he goes and he has a fling with an Asian woman as a way of kind of asserting his masculinity before he gets, tied down to marriage. And he has this relationship without any consequence, without any thought to the woman's feelings. He kind of gets called out on that. But it ends up with him coming back, at the end of his crazy weekend, having slept around, and he's going to get married. And he's going to get married. You meet the family. It's just this nice Armenian girl, and they're this nice Armenian family. There's innocent immigrants. They have no idea about, what kind of guy this is who's been out sleeping around and cheating on their daughter. And the film didn't seem to care about them at all. It didn't seem to care about the non-white woman, the Asian woman that he had slept with. Didn't seem to care about this immigrant family. It was all about this, supposedly good time bonding relationship between these white men having this kind of sexual tourism weekend. But I'm not saying that this had a particular axe to grind, against Armenians or anything like that, but maybe that's one reason I felt more sympathy for those characters who are completely in the background against this white man asserting his white privilege in that kind of freewheeling sexual tourist way.
Which
I think is this, yeah.
Go ahead.
So that's all. I'll just say yes. Just to say, I think that to me it paralleled the Matt Damon behavior, even though it was less obvious. It still fits that same pattern that one is Sideways.
They only really show him being successful in quotes with a female in some sort of romantic pairing with the non-white female. In my view, I think the white woman, they're divorced pretty quickly. Most of the time that you see them together, their loan is denied. They're disgruntled about their current situation, current living arrangement. She doesn't like the house that they're living in. Then they get divorced. He's briefly dating a white woman who has a child, and that goes nowhere quickly. I mean, this is his best pairing. Female pairing is this non-white female who was downsized even against her will. In fact, even just looking at the imbalance of it all, at minimum, he chose this voluntarily. She did not, and got a foot amputated. And even that, even with the imbalance, her absence of a foot and the fact that she didn't choose this, I would say is pretty massive, in addition to he's white, male, non-white female. I think just symbolically, I think the foot is enough. Even if, she's telling him what to do and all that, I think the foot, just seeing her hobbling around on a peg, even no less, through a good chunk of the film, that and the fact that, that they let you know from the very beginning, and from the BBC, they don't even give you a fake news story from the BBC that, oh man, this is a, famous immigrant and she was downsized against her will as punishment for protesting against the dam and all that. I think that, easily marked as a relationship where the white person, dominant position, powerful position, and the person who benefited way more in this relationship. Just my view. If folks that have seen this, if you have a different perspective, feel free. Any comments you were going to get in, Dr. Kevorkian?
Well, just as regards to the Knockline character, the Duchamp character, the Christopher Waltz character, has kind of just a cold-hearted joke about her trajectory. You say about this she arrives under very different circumstances. He says she almost died so she can clean my house. Ha ha ha. America, land of opportunity. And so he's kind of satirizing American land of opportunity, but I mean he's letting her clean the house. I mean, he's accepted that system. It's a joke to him, But yeah.
Context of White Supremacy. Just going to Suburbicon, because as I said, these two films came out at the same time with the same lead actor. I almost feel like you could kind of in my view. Now, other people could watch and say these are two totally different films, different message. Fine. I feel like you could almost squish them together and talk about them at the same time. But just getting to Suburbicon so that we can talk about it and see if they are similar and what that means. Suburbicon, I said I would do the summary for this one, 3 minutes or less. Folks can clock me. Came out 2017, December, starring Matt Damon, co-starring Julia Ann Moore. The last time Dr. Kevorkian was here, Julia Ann Moore co-star The Big Lebowski, significant because this film, the lead writing credits go to the Coen brothers. They wrote, directed The Big Lebowski, which we talked about last time. They have a pretty legendary sheet of films that they have done over the years. I think Raising Arizona, Fargo, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, No Country for Old Men. Pretty impressive Hollywood royalty, I think many people would describe the Coen brothers. I was watching this film. I didn't know that the Coen brothers were involved in this project. As I was watching it, I kept saying, this reminds me a lot of Fargo. This reminds me a lot of Fargo. And then I got to the end, and I saw the first, like, oh, the Coen brothers. Okay, I got it. George Clooney directed this project. He also has been in a number of Coen brother films. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? He was also in another, I think it's Burn After Watching. I forgot, it came out in like 2008, but he's been in a number of George Clooney films as well. His influence, or their influence on Clooney, I think, shows in this film. The basic synopsis, they show this suburb being constructed. Come move here. It's great. Same thing we heard previously. No crime, great amenities. It's wonderful. You get there. They show you how great it is. The mailman is going around, and they show that a black family has moved in. You think, because this is how it starts, you think that that is going to be what this is focused on, the terrorism that they experience and racism, white supremacy with the black family, quote unquote, integrating this neighborhood. That is not the main focus of the movie. The main focus is on the family next door, Matt Damon, his family, where he and some gangsters have conspired. I guess they are going to pull an insurance scam. They're going to kill his wife and get the insurance money, get where I guess the gangsters think they're going to get the money. It seems Matt Damon and Julia Ann Moore, who is playing both Matt Damon's wife and Matt Damon's sister-in-law, that they have concocted this wacky conspiracy where Matt Damon and his sister-in-law are going to kill his wife, take the insurance money, cheat the gangsters, not give them the money, take the money and go to Aruba or somewhere out of the United States. That's the plot that you end up watching mostly, while in the background you have all this racial disturbance because their neighbors are a family of Negroes. Accurate summary?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, including the key fact that you think it might be the movie about the black family moving in, but no, then the focus is all on the horrible self-destructive tendencies of the white family, and then the question is, does it all connect at the end?
Absolutely. I would say anyone, if you heard the last time Dr. Kevorkian was on the program and we talked about The Big Lebowski, and I mentioned Fargo. Fargo came out 1 year before The Big Lebowski. Big Lebowski also came out in 1998. The year previously, Fargo came out. And Fargo is a very similar movie. I was going to say minus the racial element, but that's not true. We're not talking about Fargo today. That's a totally different film for another day, perhaps. But very similar film. Heist goes wrong. In fact, white husband working with white gangsters to kidnap his own wife. They end up killing her, and the plot just goes horribly wrong. I was going to say it's very similar film, except there's no racial element, but that's not true. The racial element is there. It's just way more explicit in Suburbicon. In Fargo, it's there, but it's very minimal. I said last time Dr. Kevorkian was here, there are a lot of black lawn jockeys in Fargo. There's no golf. Why are the black lawn jockeys there? That's one. There's also an Asian character that all of that, I would say, is just blatant, flagrant white supremacy, racism, but you can watch Fargo and come to your own conclusion. What do you make of the title of the film, and even more specifically, the connection to the word Rubicon?
Oh, okay. I had not drawn the connection to the word Rubicon. I mean, it seemed to me just like a kind of comically on the nose naming of this idealized, iconic suburb, right? So, I'm sure that there were many model communities that were built at this time, but it's just kind of making a joke of what if we called our suburb a suburb, Suburbicon. So it's this idealized community, and the joke is that there's this little marketing film which calls it quote a melting pot of diversity, with people hailing from places as far away as New York, Ohio, and even Mississippi. But every time they show one of those states, they just show white faces. So it says the only thing missing is you. So I thought it was just a sort of satirizing a nostalgia for an idealized suburban neighborhood. Rubicon, crossing the Rubicon is some sort of irreversible decision, going back across something from which you can't come back. And I suppose a lot of the Coen Brothers films are about characters making some sort of one bad decision from which everything else follows. They cross the Rubicon and then the whole thing is set in motion. In Fargo, it's the decision to kidnap the wife, and this time it's the decision to hire these gangsters to kill the wife. But I didn't have anything else on. I didn't have anything specifically in mind on Rubicon, so I'm intrigued by that reference.
I've just been pondering. It seems like it's got to be there or unless I've just misread. It seems like it's there. It's included in the title, and what you just said, that would certainly seem to fit. Once the decision is made to be in cahoots with these gangsters, it is downhill from there. It seems very irreversible, and that does seems to be a major pattern in many of the Coen brother films that I've seen. One decision, and that's it. Everything is going to go bad from there. There's nothing you can do to correct it. It's just going to be watching everything blow up and burn from here to the end, basically. What do you make of the name? And this is maybe one I should have asked for both, since I'm saying that these are very, very similar movies, like curiously similar movies. Gardner Lodge, we had Paul Safronic the first time around. This time, Matt Damon, we get Gardner Lodge. What do you make of the name?
Gardner Lodge. Well, I mean, the gardener, I thought, was supposed to suggest like that this would be an ideal person to live in a suburb, someone where you have the white picket fence and the green lawn, and he's going to tend his lawn. Although, in fact, I think the only person you ever see mowing a lawn is Mr. Myers, the black man, who is in fact performing a kind of gardening function, doing the labor of gardening, whereas Gardner Lodge doesn't do that. The Lodge name seems like a kind of white royalty, white aristocracy name. Henry Cabot Lodge, famous American statesman, the Lodge family would be like kind of old money New England. Although there's a weird joke that's made out of it, in which one of the cops, Officer Hightower, says to Lodge about the home intrusion that's occurred at his house. He says, "Thank God it wasn't the Schwarzers who just moved in. Isn't that what you Jews call them?" Referring to a term for black people, Schwarzers. And so for some reason, Hightower thinks that Lodge is a Jewish name, but Matt Damon finds this incomprehensible. Like, why did you think I was Jewish? I didn't really know where that joke went, but it was in there to kind of, to my mind, it actually just highlighted, actually, Lodge seems to me as a super white Anglo name.
That's interesting. That almost, I remember that scene. One racist joke. Thank goodness it wasn't the Schwartzes that moved in. Ha ha ha. That somebody I know does highlight racist jokes. I think that was a major theme when we had Dr. Kevorkian on before from some of the films that we including Big Lebowski, racist jokes being there. But because that comes up a few times where they're talking and it's we're not Jewish, we're Episcopalian, and the character's just kind of okay, and they go on. It's almost reminding me of someone's whiteness status maybe being questioned, because you're saying Lodge is a super white name, shouldn't be any question there. But I mean, if and this is almost kind of that nostalgia, like kind of set back when things were great, when perhaps a time period where if you were Jewish, your white status might not be as secure, almost seeming like maybe his white status is being questioned, maybe a little bit again, maybe not. Are there any white characters depicted in Suburbicon that are not racist, that a reasonable person could watch the film and say, I don't think that this white person is racist?
Good question. I mean, there's a character that kind of surprises you in his heroic efforts, and it's the uncle, what is it, Uncle Mitch?
Yep.
Who kind of comes and almost saves the day. I don't remember like rating him on a racist scale. I just remember thinking, he's like that really annoying uncle that borderline abuses the kid, like turns him upside down and shakes him and like says, puts some money in his pocket and says, you can keep anything that stays in your pocket, and then turns him upside down and shakes all the money out of him. And just seems like this kind of big, overbearing guy who's demanding that the kid love him, who loves you like your dad and all that. But then he actually does kind of come through and protect the kid from the thugs who are coming to kill him in the night. So he's a sort of short-lived character, but it seemed like every other character was sort of hell-bent on some sort of evil scheme, and an evil scheme that ended up revealing and implicating them in a system of racism. Maybe I missed it on this guy, but yeah.
The only thing I could say with Uncle Mitch is I don't recall him having any contact with any black people or even any commentary about any of the black people. I just remember his oafish scene dumping the kid over his shoulder and complaining about the Episcopalians repeatedly from the service, and being very concerned about his nephew. He does come through to save the nephew at the end, but while the Myers family, this black family, is being terrorized and having their car set on fire and bricks thrown through their window and all the other things that are happening to them throughout the film. I don't recall Uncle Mitch doing anything or even making a comment to say, "Oh man, that's terrible. What's happening to your neighbors?" But they're like, I don't remember that to even give Uncle Mitch a pass. All I can say is I don't remember him saying anything bad or participating in the melee against them, but that in my book would not count as proof that he is not racist. Anybody, was Mitch the only one? Anybody else qualify as not racist, any of the white characters?
No, I mean, that's what you say is that there's this continual thing going on, strangely in the background and yet noticeable, that the black family's house is just continually under siege. And the people right next door don't seem to be commenting on that. That's, other than to nevertheless blame the black family for violent things that are happening to their own family, which they themselves have caused. But apart from that, they don't seem to be taking an interest in the well-being of their neighbors. So.
At all. And in fact, and all of the white people they do pop out from time to time to show other white people in the neighborhood and what they are thinking about all of this. Unison, their racist views, white men, white women, white younger people, in unison, in lockstep, everybody is furious about the Myers and wants them out, and, let's get it done right now. Julia Ann Moore's character, she is playing Gardner Lodge's wife and Gardner Lodge's sister-in-law, who is in cahoots with him to kill his wife. Julia Ann Moore playing both of these characters. What significance or importance of that?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. It was weird. It was part of the deliberate absurdity. I think that the Coen brothers love to create absurdity and sort of escalating absurdity and violence, but sort of being able to double her and have her, basically killed off, twice. And she was I'll just say that the sister character sent conflicting messages. You can see the bitterness of the initial wife who was injured in the car accident for which Matt Damon's Gardner Lodge character was at fault. And you can see that she's bitter and then she's taken care of. But the one thing that I couldn't quite make sense of was that the sister is the only one at the beginning who takes notice of the neighbors in anything even approaching a positive way. It's kind of condescending the way she says it. But just about 5 minutes in, she's out on the porch with the white kid, and she just asked the kid to go play baseball. She says, look, those people just moved indoor, and they've got a little boy your age. And she says in a kind of saying, why don't you go play baseball with that little colored boy? But she at least acknowledges that there's a possibility that this kid in her family could have a relationship with that kid in that family. And later then she turns out to be monstrously in on this plot to kill her own sister. But I didn't know how to read that initial gesture, which seemed, even if minimally, to set her aside from either the overt hostility or the cold indifference that everyone had of just ignoring these new black neighbors.
I would have perhaps been more receptive if she had not identified him as colored. I remember watching that scene a few times, and even if she had said black, that still would have been enough, because, if you were just relating and said, hey, Nicholas, that's the child's name in the movie, go play with that kid. go play with that child next door. They just moved in, and I'm going to, hey, maybe, but once you've a white person identifying someone, black, non-white, where I'm identifying this person as a non-white individual racially, their racial classification is important enough that that has to be included when I'm referencing and talking about them. Yeah. And particularly what happens later in the film when she gets to the grocery store. Like, yeah. At minimum, you're working for a racist white supremacist, and she doesn't have any lines where she gets to come home and go, do you see what they did to the Myers? I can't believe it. And I'm so, since that didn't happen, like, I still go back. There are no white people in the film who appear to be not racist, and there appear to be no white people in the film who seem ignorant about racism, where they don't know why this conflict is going on. All of the white people presented seem very, very informed about racism, white supremacy, and what is expected of them as a white person, even the white children. I was going to address the violence, but the white ignorance piece, I think, is also very important. That's something we talk about on the program all the time. White people are not allowed to be ignorant about racism, white supremacy. In this film, specifically when Matt Damon's character, when all of this is going on, these gangsters come in his house and kill his wife, and the police are trying to figure out who did that, and it just gets worse from there. The gangsters are still waiting to get the insurance money, and that's taking a long time. The insurance people are asking questions, and they end up having to kill an insurance person. It just goes on and on and on. But while all of this is happening, the police, like I said, they're doing their investigation. They come back and question Matt Damon's character and are saying, hey, we found this other gangster person. He died. He had your name in his book. Seems you might have owed him some money. That might explain why all this craziness has happened. If you owed these gangsters some money and you didn't want to pay or couldn't pay or whatever it is, and, do you want to tell us something? And he says, nope, don't know anything. Oh, all right. We'll keep looking, and they leave. Now, if that had been a black person, any era, 1940s, 1930s, 1920s, Clayton Lockett from Black Mirror, I think things would have been more there. That's, at least in my view, white people are not ignorant, even about other white people. That white policeman, he seemed pretty sure that, yeah, I think that's what's going on here. You owed these gangsters some money you didn't want to pay or whatever, and they killed your wife. I think that's what's going on here, but you don't want to fess up to it. Fine, we can play that way. I think that sort of thing happens with white people all the time, where they are finding out their other secrets, particularly finding out where they have been practicing racism, white supremacy, and they don't snitch. Yeah, I know you did all this stuff. Yeah, it seems you're lying about all this, but I'm not going to snitch. And in fact, you have legions of white people who are going around through this film and blaming all of this chaos and bloodshed on the black people, not the white people that have been literally killing people out in the middle of the street, left and right, all kinds of shenanigans. All of that gets blamed on black people. And I'm just submitting from the film that I think this is happening a lot of times where white people are just telling flagrant lies where they know other white people, they are engaged in all sorts of criminal activity, but we're just going to lie and just say the niggers did it. Is that reasonable based on the film?
It's reasonable based on what all the white people that they have, those talking headshots. I feel like the two plots really do come together at the end of the film, where they interview the old white woman, and she says, none of this ever happened before the Myers lived there. When she says none of this, she's talking about all the violence and killing that has just taken place next door to the Myers, which is completely the fault of Gardner Lodge. But she says none of this ever happened before the Myers lived here. It was a white community. And just before that, you've seen the Matt Damon father trying to teach his son this system, which is based on a system of deliberate lying. And he's been threatening his son. He's basically even said he's going to kill his son, essentially, if the son doesn't lie to cover up the father's guilt. And in the midst of telling the kid to lie for him, he just kind of jumps tracks really quickly, and he says, "I want you to stay away from that colored boy. You hear me?" And then his very next statement is, "These animals took everything from us." And there's a non sequitur there in which he is blaming the non-white neighbors for something that's actually a reference to someone else. When he says these animals took everything from us, the literal reference is the white thugs that he paid to kill his wife. And so those are the thugs that actually did take everything from us, or as the kid says. And there is that moment of, I don't know if it's hopeful or not, but there's a moment of resistance, at least, where the kid said, "It was you did all of this." But it's right after the father has told the sequence of lies, which is, we're going to tell this story that I'm innocent, or if you don't, I'm going to kill you. And the next statement is, "You stay away from that colored boy, you hear me." And then the next statement is, these animals took everything from us, where there's a kind of slippage or association of shifting that blame in a way that both everyone in the room at that moment knows is completely contrary to fact.
Really important point, context of white supremacy. In that scene, I think I mentioned The Purge before when we were talking about that and some of the really chilling scenes in The Purge, and I think the scene that you mentioned was kind of the first Purge film, where they're kind of close to the end and they have the black guy inside, and they have this problem. They're trying to figure out what to do, and he says, "Go get a rope." That just the history of what that has meant for black people in the system of white supremacy. That scene where Matt Damon is sitting blood splattered after he's killed, at this point, who knows how many people, even taking a fire poker and killing him, bashing a man's skull in the middle of the street. And the only thing that kept, I guess, peering eyes from seeing that, or that allowed him to be able to go out and kill someone in the middle of the street, was all of the white town was at the black house terrorizing them. But after he's done all of this and is covered in blood and has killed his own wife, and his sister-in-law has been killed in the house, his brother-in-law has been killed in the house, other gangsters have been killed in the house, all of this mayhem. And he sits down, blood spattered, and tells his child, "We're going to get our lives straight. Stay away from that nigger boy next door." He says colored in the movie, but stay away from him. Just that alone, like, wow. The priorities of racism, white supremacy, and then exactly as you said, because I think that happens a couple of times in the movie, where someone is making a statement where they're talking about whatever criminal activity or mischief has gone on that is attributed to somebody else, but the way that they're saying it and or the way that things are framed, it's almost as though they're talking about the black family. I think there's another time where they do a shot, they're showing the Myers family cleaning up after there's been a riot on their lawn. There's a Confederate flag in the window. They've burned their car and bashed windows in and what have you. They've had just a mob all over their property for days and days and days. And they do a still shot of Mr. Myers as he's standing in his yard, which is in ruins. And they do the same thing. These animals, these thugs, I can't believe it. And it's almost double entendre. Are they talking about the Myers, or are they talking about these white gangsters who've been engaged in all this activity, and even Gardner Lodge himself, who's been engaged in all of this? But that happens a few times throughout the film. In my view, I think the Myers family, I think even the Myers family, the fact that they don't really have any lines. I think Miss Myers, you kind of hear her at the very beginning where she just acknowledges, like, "Oh, I'm not the help. This is actually my house. I'm the homeowner." And then the brief exchange she has in the grocery store where they tell her, basically, "We don't want your money. Get out." Other than that, she does, and talking to her son, I think she speaks to her son a few times, but she doesn't really have any lines. The husband doesn't really have any lines. They're just kind of there as targets for white violence and racism. Basically, they're not even really fully developed characters in the narrative. I guess I also thought it was I thought it was significant that the child figured it out. I was saying about white ignorance before, that Nicholas figured out his dad had been lying, all of this. You have multiple characters. And I also thought the sexual perversion in this film was really important. Now I can do my reach back to Black Mirror moment to really make my point. Matt Damon, it's been said a few times, but I'm just going to continue to emphasize it just because of the ickiness of it all, which can be a trademark of Coen Brother films, but I don't even remember this being in Coen Brother films before. So Matt Damon's character conspires with his wife's sister, his sister-in-law, to kill his wife, and then he engages in a sexual relationship with his sister-in-law. I think of that as sexual perversion. Maybe others don't. The pattern that I see with all of that, the film that we just talked about, I did have sound clips today. I've just been lazy to not play some, and others I was waiting to get to them. In Downsizing, they have a character called Little Ronnie. He's supposed to be famous because he's the first little person, after they've downsized folks, he's the first downsized baby to be born. So that's his celebrity status. And so after they do a few time jumps, you get to see Little Ronnie when he's like 18 or 20 or whatever. So he's famous. He gets to go around. This is Dushan, which is Paul Safronik's neighbor, commenting on Little Ronnie. Paul has just met Little Ronnie, is all excited, like, oh, I got to hang out, I got to take a selfie with Little Ronnie. This is what Dushan has to say about Little Ronnie.
Did you know Little Ronnie was here? I mean, he is historic.
Boring. You know, good-looking, dumb Norwegian guy goes around the world having sex with everyone. Women, men, hermaphrodites, dogs, goats, monkeys. He'll be the first small baby to die of syphilis. But, historic.
So we got that from Downsizing. Now I can go back to Black Mirror. That Black Museum episode, it's a kind of convoluted episode, but it's 3 vignettes within a greater story. The first vignette shows a doctor who gets an implant so he can feel the sensations of other people, including sexual sensations, and this goes from him being able to experience both male and female orgasms simultaneously to him enjoying the pain of others. I think we talked about gratuitous violence and even sadism, enjoying beating and all this stuff going on in sex. Sexual perversions, major theme running through all of the films that we looked at today. And I would even go back to The Big Lebowski, since that was a Coen Brother film, and what we talked about last time. I guess, Dr. Kevorkian, your response, the significance of this relationship with Gardner Lodge being with his wife, and then he works with her sister, his sister-in-law, to kill her, and then gets in a sexual relationship with her, and the greater pattern of sexual perversion that seems to run through all the films we've talked about today.
Yeah, I mean, that particular perversion of essentially, sleeping with his sister, that's one version of white supremacy. It's sort of a two-faced thing, but one version of it is one ultimate logic of a certain kind of racism is incest, that there's this idea of purity and that you could only breed within almost your own family because anything else would be, well, it used to be termed miscegenation or a mixture of the races. So there's this perversion that is like turning to the wife and then to the sister that feels like that kind of inbreeding. But on the other hand, then there's, that's the privilege relationship, but then as the term that we've been using before, there's sexual tourism all over the place, the privilege of being able to experience all kinds of pleasures with non-white characters. And again, in Downsizing, it's very striking that this downsized Leisure World neighborhood is pretty much super white, except at Dushan's party, where the party girls or the party women are multi-ethnic and diverse and are there for the enjoyment of the guests. And it's even suggested that relationships can be had for a price. So it's kind of the world. There's, on the one hand, there's the perversity of incest, which is about preserving bloodline purity. On the other hand, there's the idea that the rest of the world is a brothel, that people outside of that whiteness covenant are to be treated as objects and property to be purchased and used. And I just want to also say about the little Ronnie thing and some of these plots about the people going into the vault to preserve the human race. Norway seems really significant as a signifier. It's a country that's important in the imagination of Donald Trump when he had recent controversial comments about limiting immigration. He was saying, we need to limit immigration from these countries that aren't sending us anyone valuable, that can't give us anything good. Why can't we figure out a way to get more immigrants from Norway? Norway is, in that imagination, is sort of the pinnacle of the whiteness of white supremacy. So I think it's significant that little Ronnie has that identity, and also this kind of weird little cult-like group that is intent on preserving the future of the human race. Yes, it looks like they have some ethnic diversity in their group that they're going to take off into the vault, but that it originates in this kind of Norway white purity world.
Great point about Norway. Absolutely. I also thought it was a great signifier in downsizing, even though we're supposed to be on Suburbicon now. I thought it was a great signifier when Matt Damon's character, when he's about to go head down into the center and they're going to preserve humanity away from all the gas that's escaped, when he sees the black male. And they're like, it's like an 11-mile hike. I think it's 11 miles. 11-mile hike. You got to go up and then you got to go back down to get there. When he sees him, he's like, whoa, 11 miles. I don't know if I should do this. And he turns around. It's like, you don't want to be following a black person. Like, I thought that was a very important racial signifier. A black person, go the other way. Just turn around, which he does, and happy ending. He gets to go back and be with a non-white female. Suburbicon, make sure I did not miss that. I think for both of these films, the fact that, or I think one of the things that drew me to them, that this is Matt Damon. Matt Damon's a pretty big time Hollywood actor. The Born Supremacy films, I guess they're still coming out. I think one of them came out like 2016 or wherever it was. But in those films, he's really athletic and muscular, and he can kill like 50 people with a toothpick in like 2 minutes and go all over the world. And he's got money and passport. I mean, white supremacy. Dominate, kill, violence, whatever you need, get it done. White supremacy. And trained by the CIA. White trained killer soldier. In these Born Supremacy films, and I think that's he's had roles like that throughout his career. This is neither of these films, Suburbicon, Downsizing, neither of these are that Matt Damon. This is like pudgy, gray-haired, no athleticism at all, botches everything in both films, complete failure in both films, like very, very far from the way that I normally see, the type of roles that I normally see Matt Damon play. And to have him out in two films that almost came out simultaneously and in December, no less. Like these are like at least in my view, the December films that generally this is what the family is supposed to get around for the holidays. Like everybody's coming in to visit and, maybe this is what we go watch on Christmas night or Christmas Eve, or as people this is what we're watching. To me, this is a very different white cinema experience than what I am accustomed to seeing, especially from a Hollywood A-lister like Matt Damon. And for it not to just be one but two at the same time piqued a lot of my interest. That was why I picked two of these, or at least a big part of why I picked two of these films. Your thoughts, Dr. Kevorkian?
Yeah, well, I just mentioned first that, well, maybe not trivial fact, but as I mentioned to you when you proposed this, as soon as I got the DVD for Suburbicon, sure enough, it included a preview for Downsizing. So definitely these are marketed to the same audience at the same time. And the idea, if you like Suburbicon, you'll love Downsizing. But what you just said really clarified for me the power of the Matt Damon casting decision in terms of playing into and tapping into that white resentment that you've been identifying, the white resentment that created the wave that elected Donald Trump, that Matt Damon, from the beginning of his career, even in Good Will Hunting, he plays this super mathematical genius who always outsmarts everybody. He's kind of an everyman. He's salt of the earth, but he's super smart and he always wins. And you're right, the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Supremacy, it's always about him winning and being superior to any situation. And yes, why I think that's so important for the pairing of these two films is that you see Matt Damon in these diminished roles, in these diminished capacities, and that backlog of his identity makes the audience feel, oh, that's Matt Damon, he deserves better, which is a particular way of, particularly I think, a white male viewer identifying, watching that role and saying, that's Matt Damon, he deserves better. That's the character I identify with. I deserve better. So I think that the casting against type for Matt Damon makes you feel that tension between the expectation of what we think, the world that we think Matt Damon deserves versus what he's being offered, is perfect way of channeling that white resentment.
I guess for our listeners, the thing I would encourage folks to think about, even though I'm saying both of these films are very similar in this position of a white man who has lost his status, lost his power, or whatever his aspirations of power in the system of racism, they have not achieved them, and it's looking like might not ever achieve them, that they might be, and there are lots of reports suggesting that there seem to be a lot of particularly white men who feel this way, and with what they've been talking about with the opioid crisis and all of that, perhaps a lot of white men and women, period, feeling this way. Some of that even during the Obama years, certainly. The thing that stood out for me more so in Suburbicon than Downsizing, that many of these white men, women become very desperate, very dangerous. And that's certainly Suburbicon. The pathetic white man becomes a very, very desperate, dangerous individual. I think Downsizing, they make him more of a goofball that you can just kind of laugh and pathetic, fun. I think that's the way he gets described by Dushan. He's pathetic but likable guy. That is not the case in Suburbicon, and I think that is much closer to the reality of things. If you have a substantial number of white people, that's how they're feeling, that they have been denied their opportunity and feeling as though they're missing out on some element of power and domination in this system, that you could have substantially more Gardner Lodges who are looking to do desperate, dangerous things to recoup some sense of loss. Dr. Kevorkian?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of just trying to recoup that sense of loss, well, I want to say, first off, I think Suburbicon and probably Matt Damon himself in this probably thinks he is satirizing, and probably thinks he is trying to expose that malignant attitude, even though I think the film itself plays into it. But I think of that, very much of that first town meeting, where there's angry white people talking about the Myers, the black family moving in, and saying, we don't want them here. And the city council kind of throws up its hand, says, there's not much we can do about it. They're expressing this sort of powerlessness. This is the way things are going. But in terms of trying to reclaim it, the town person speaks back. And he says in this very impassioned way, is, we demand our civil rights to live where we want, with whom we want, and with God's help, we will overcome. And this is someone who's speaking in a way who is directly appropriating and repurposing the language of civil rights to turn against the idea of civil rights and racial justice, trying to turn it against itself. I could say more about the context there, but to me it was significant that in the opening infomercial, it notes that Suburbicon, fictional Suburbicon, was founded in 1947, and the action that we are seeing takes place 12 years later, it says. So now it's 12 years later, so it's supposed to be in 1959. And when that angry white person says we will overcome in terms of actually halting racial justice, 1959 was also the same year that the folk song "We Shall Overcome" became associated with the civil rights movement. So it's taking that phrase and throwing it right back in the face of civil rights itself. I would say the other thing is that song, in its form, "We Will Overcome," was first published in 1947. So it almost seems like Suburbicon is directly referencing that history of a song that is meant to be about achieving a more just society. But this is about a satire in which that society is fighting tooth and nail to turn back against any progress that could have been won. The thing that I also wanted to say I think is significant, that the film seems to be aware of that and to be deliberately showing this to be ironic, an ironic subversion of "We Will Overcome." But, it's a film, made by white people and putting white people as the heroes, even if these heroes are the ones that are supposedly satirizing these things. That song, when it became associated with civil rights in 1959, was being performed by white folk singers in that instance. The history that I think is not being cited in this film is that the song, when it was published in 1947, was adapted from a song that was written by Charles Tinley in 1900, which is "I'll Overcome Someday." The Reverend Charles Tinley was an African-American reverend in the Methodist Episcopal Church. He preached in Maryland and Delaware. He grew up in Philadelphia. He was known as the Prince of the Preachers. He was born in 1851 and lived at a time when there were very limited educational opportunities. Interesting fact about him is that he learned Hebrew with the help of a Philadelphia synagogue. So that's a different kind of moment in Black-Jewish relations, where he turned to the Jewish community to help get the education he needed to become a biblical scholar and preacher. Anyhow, he's the guy who originally writes the song "I'll Overcome Someday." And he was leading civil rights movements, before it was called that. In 1915, the Reverend Charles Tinley led protests marching against screenings of Birth of a Nation, the famous racist film, and he was attacked during those protests. He also led protests against forms of entertainment that were demeaning to African Americans. He led protests against minstrelsy shows. So I think that Suburbicon is aware of that white townsperson appropriating a white person's folk song of civil rights, but I'm not convinced that it's aware that white folk person's way of going after racial justice was itself originally taken from an African American preacher preaching out of the scriptures. Another just kind of fun fact is that I found about the Reverend Tinley is that he also originally wrote "Stand By Me," which was turned into a hit by Benny King in 1961. Folks may know that song, but both of those songs came from the scriptures. The "I'll Overcome Someday" is from Galatians 6:9, and the "Stand By Me" is from Psalms 46. But I think there's a deeper history of African American civil rights that is not being directly acknowledged in this film, even if it wants to satirize the appropriation of the 1950s civil rights.
Great insight. Reading is more important than watching TV. Reading, writing, doing some research. Always have appreciation for getting some history out on Reverend Tinley. I did not know any of that information, the history of the song "We Shall Overcome" or any of that. Always great. Still learning. That even getting all of that additional information just makes it all the more glaring, the Myers almost remaining mum throughout the project. Greater voice could have been either given directly to them or some of that history that's been appropriated and or buried, which they didn't do. That almost answered my question. I think I did answer my question. I was going to ask when you said that you felt like the film is trying to call attention to some of the ways that white people have appropriated some of blacks' efforts to counter racism, white supremacy, but it doesn't do a very good job and even plays into some of those same racist themes. And there you go, answered my own question. Listeners, if you all have comments, questions on what we have discussed, the number 641-715-3640, the code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you have a question. Did you have anything? Did we miss anything from those two films? Any comments you wanted to get in before we try and get a caller or two?
I'll just say one thing, not that you missed, but to underscore what you said about Mr. Myers. As far as I can tell, I don't believe he says a single word. The closest he gets to having a line is really he's being indirectly quoted by his son. And Andy says, my dad says we don't show him nothing. We don't show him that don't show him you're scared. So there is the idea that he has been a positive father, that he has taught his son courage, but we don't see that relationship. We don't see that interaction of father and son. What we do see is the terrible white supremacist interaction of the Matt Damon father with his son. But it's striking to me that he doesn't say anything. There's also a whole bit about people not being named. It's the kid, Nikki, shows the white kid the snake, and the kid asks, well, what's his name? And he says he's a snake, he's an animal, he doesn't have a name. And at that point, we haven't learned the kid's name either. So I think there's a lot in this film about denying the black characters' names for a while, and certainly throughout denying them voices.
Absolutely. Could not agree with that 100%. Let's see. Thomas in New York, did you have a question? Great point. Animals do not need names. Man, I will think about that from now on. When I'm sure it will probably come up tomorrow during workplace racism, a black person not being called by their correct name or mispronounced or given a nickname or whatever it is. Animals do not need names. Keeping that one in mind. Thomas in New York, did you have a question for Dr. Kevorkian? You should be with us.
Yes, I do. Good evening, Gus.
Greetings.
Greetings to Dr. Kevorkian. I had two questions. One is, because you mentioned this several times with Trump, the drastic increase in hate crimes the last year and the first few months of this year, and the FBI admitting to a huge increase in hate groups around the country. Do you think this is the Trump effect, or do you think this is the post-Obama effect?
Wow. Yes. Thank you, Thomas in New York. So there has been a definite increase in hate crimes. I think that it's a broad cultural movement. I tend to think that Trump was elected as a backlash of pent-up resentment of white people not liking to see a black man in a position of leadership. So I would tend to say that Trump himself is in a certain way is an Obama effect. I wouldn't necessarily give Trump the credit. I don't know if that's the right word with these hate crimes. I think Trump is another effect like the hate crimes of a widespread white resentment that Mr. Renegade has helped us to see and analyze as reflected in these films. So I would lean more on white anger coming from Obama rather than, say, white, not quite so much the case. I think there is an effect that there have been white hate groups that have been emboldened by Trump, but I wouldn't say that he has had that much of a causal effect. But just even on, these are not hate crimes per se, but we've noticed even around universities that there's more white supremacist propaganda being reported. There's just a coverage in the student newspaper said between September 2016 and December 2017, 346 incidents of white supremacist propaganda were reported. Colleges in Texas were targeted the most with 61 incidents. And UT Austin was one of the colleges targeted by such organizations. In February 2017, posters were put up by the American Vanguard encouraging students to imagine a, quote, Muslim-free America, in that very heavily racially charged way of putting it. Yes, we're seeing an increase in hate crimes. We're seeing increase in boldness in white supremacist organizations. And it's very disturbing, but I think you pointed to two good ways of thinking about it. You have a second question, sir?
Yes, sir. The CIA recently put out pretty much a memo saying that they've been in Hollywood for some time and pretty much deciding a lot of the scenes, any uses of spy movies and things. They have to get to go ahead before it goes forward and give people Hollywood access to certain equipment and things. So I just wanted to know what were your thoughts on that, and that's my last question. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have to apologize. There was an echo there. I probably talked too long on my last answer, but Mr. Renegade, did you catch that?
I think the question, Thomas in New York can let me know. I think he said there was a recent report about the CIA involvement in Hollywood films, and particularly if it's some sort of like spy film or what have you, that they have to be notified before, I guess, the film goes ahead or what have you. He wanted your thoughts on that. Was that the question, Thomas? Did I mess it up?
Yes, very good, Gus.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for not hearing that well. I will say I'm not very well informed about that, particular recent CIA involvement, but I will say that CIA surveillance is something that is examined critically and extensively in the book that I mentioned and the research I mentioned by Professor Simone Brown, Dark Matters. That she, one of those, it goes all the way up to, post 9/11 airport security practices, but she looks at surveillance by the CIA, surveillance particularly of black bodies. CIA involvement in issues such as those that you're talking about and issues of even what is put out by Hollywood. Yeah, I think that's a real thing. Her starting point of departure for research on that book was CIA tracking of Frantz Fanon, who wrote anti-colonial studies. But definitely there's a CIA interest in controlling the larger narratives of our culture, what gets published, what gets put out there. They want to tell the stories they want to tell.
Storytelling, an important weapon in the system of white supremacy. If other folks have questions, do not wait till we get to the end of the broadcast and decide that you have a question to get your hand up. Go ahead and ask now. I did say I was going to wait until it was closer to the end of the program. I guess this is closer to the end to slip in at least one quick question, maybe two, by Black Panther, since I'm sure many more folks all over the world are way more familiar with that project than probably any of the films that we talked about today. I think they're grossed over $1 billion globally, still going strong. predominantly black cast. I think one of the most successful superhero films ever. What is your take on this film doing so well, where it would seem that even a lot of black people, or excuse me, a lot of white moviegoers have gone to see it and had great things to say about it?
Yeah, I think in terms of looking at the film critically, one of the key characters to look at is the treatment of Eric Killmonger, played by Michael B. Jordan in that film, who is someone that I suppose, historically would be closer to being, earning a title of being like a Black Panther in the political sense. So this is a film that does put a whole range of black characters in powerful positions. It's been described as embracing Afrofuturism. One of the best things about Afrofuturism is that, in fact, it does imagine a future in which there are non-white people. So it's got that positive aspect to it, and it shows black people having a powerful and empowered relationship with technology. As you mentioned with Black Mirror, you might see anxiety about black people having power with technology. But this is a film that seems to embrace that power. But I would say within limits. It wants to discipline and keep down, and does not see the survivability of a character like Eric Killmonger, who in some ways could be seen as someone who is crusading for justice for non-white people. And he's a revolutionary in that sense. Obviously, he's not given a very attractive name with a name like Killmonger, so you're not going to expect him to emerge as the hero. But there's a moment at near the end where Chadwick Boseman, the main Black Panther character, essentially ends up killing him. But it seems like it, from a plot sense and in terms of the mutual understanding the characters seem to have at that point, it didn't seem like it would have necessarily had to play out that way, that there could have been a world in which Black Panther and Eric Killmonger work together to use this technology in positive ways for justice. But perhaps the popular success of a film like this depends on the sacrifice of the radical leader, the Eric Killmonger character. I think, Mr. Rennie, we've talked about this, other figures of the black radical who gets subverted or undermined or portrayed in a negative light and has to be eliminated. I believe we made reference to this with a character who was kind of a Black Pantherish character in The Bank Job that we talked about in passing. And did it also come up, and I think that was when we had our conversation about The Last King of Scotland, but I'm a little hazy on that. But that's my imperfect take on that the sacrifice of the Michael B. Jordan character is the unfortunate cost of making this a mainstream palatable film.
I was thinking of Bank Job. That's one of the films we discussed some time ago, and I think that theme is definitely there. A strong black character sounding like they are serious about doing something about racism, probably not going to be at the end of the film doing well. Please, where you got the girl and everything worked out well for you. That tends not to be the case in white supremacy cinema. Is that your? Because I have not seen this film and have no intention of seeing it. I use the same logic that I use for Get Out. Any film that a lot of white people are really excited about and talking well, and it's a film that's marketed as a quote-unquote black film with black main actors and actresses or predominantly black cast, I get very, very suspicious when white people are excited about a project like that. Is that your impression, that many white moviegoers or a large number of white moviegoers are pleased about this film?
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's been widely praised, and I'm at a campus where, we've got graduate students who are tend to be very critical of a lot of things in popular culture. But, I had graduate students tell me, "Oh, believe the hype. This is a great movie." People are taking it seriously and celebrating it. I haven't taken in the whole spectrum. I'm sure there must be critiques of it out there. But it was a film that was, recommended to me by people who often are critical of things like this, but gave this one a pass. So,
I told our listening audience weeks ago when the white women in my yoga class are talking in glowing terms about a film that is supposed to be connected with black liberation and ending racism, I tend to think that it's probably not going to solve the problem. I could be wrong. Maybe the white women in my Seattle yoga class know something that I don't, but I don't think so. Not in this regard. The number, again, before I was going to check on other callers, but have you given your critique, I guess, to some of your grad students who said, hey, this is a great film and it's conscious and we're giving this one a pass? Have you given them your critique about Mr. Killmonger and, hey, I think some of the things that have been done here have been to appease white moviegoers. Maybe you should take another look.
Yeah, I have not had the opportunity. I haven't met with the particular guy that I had in mind. We're on spring break right now, and I'll probably see him after that. But yes, I'll say I have not been spreading the critique, so I should answer back. Yeah.
And would encourage, perhaps one day down the line, if I check it out, I'll be able to give more informed commentary, but don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Caller at 2617. Did you have commentary for Dr. Kevorkian? You should be with us.
Yeah, my question is, Dr. Kevorkian, what do you think the response, if there's going to be like a cinematic response to Black Panther would be by the suspected white supremacists in quote-unquote Hollywood?
That's interesting. So what would be the response?
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I mean, what did I just see? Is there I guess there's going to be
cinematically.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about different things that are sort of within this orbit. I think there's a new TV show. It's called, is it Black Lightning? That is probably. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's going to be great, but it's going to attempt to tread some of these same themes of kind of a black power superhero. I mean, I guess this is an evasive answer, but I'll say that part of it what Mr. Renegade and I are saying is that Black Panther already to some extent contains its own response. It contains within it outcomes that undermine some of the things that it seems to be endorsing about Black power. Insofar as the character most identified with what would be recognizable as political Black power is killed in it. But are you thinking that like another film? Are you imagining a film that would come out that would be like, I don't know, someone defeats Black Panther or someone defeats? I mean, there might be some. I mean, I don't think there'd be a character. There'd be a film where actually Black Panther is defeated. I don't think the Marvel universe is going to want that to happen. But you definitely might see other films out there in which some character that would remind you of Black Panther might be seen to have some sort of being brought down to earth or being cut down to size. That's conceivable.
If I can, Gus, can I give him a kind of explanation of my question?
Oh, let's hear it.
So, if movies, or what we call movies in multimedia, if it's a way of scripting racial stereotypes and therefore racial patterns of behavior, I think we can agree to that. But so I grew up in the '80s when Dukes of Hazzard, MacGyver, it was a million shows where the average, ordinary white dude was God of the universe, pretty much. And so I think I linked it to, in the '60s, the quote-unquote, quote, blaxploitation movies that I also saw before the '80s, that was like Dolomite and just black dudes whipping ass and Pam Grier whipping white people ass and shit like that. And and the response, I'm like, media-wise, or what's allowed by the white supremacists, ultimately who funds the projects, who controls the quote-unquote outlet, the distribution of the work, it's like trends. They match each other. So in the '80s, all this stuff about the all-American hero, and then all of a sudden they created this thing, or allowed this thing called rap or gangster rap, which gave a script for the quote-unquote lost fatherless black youth to follow a racial script to our demise, but it was fed to us by the white supremacists who control multimedia. They, Jerry Heller is Jerry Heller, damn it. So, suspect racist, and all like him who will never hear us. So they're the same ones in all this multimedia. So what's the response after Black Panther, which of course it undermined itself, but now they still have to have a, don't you think white supremacists still have to have like a physical, psychological response now in trends in movies?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess, and you're right, sometimes it happens by things being recycled. I mean, I wonder if, even on the, not just on the other side of Black Panther, but, on the one, even what Mr. Renegade is talking about with this diminished Matt Damon character, right? Are we going to then see a next cycle where there's the return of the white god, right? We've seen Matt Damon in his diminished capacity. We've seen Black Panther in his power. So then is the next trend going to be the return of the MacGyver, the return of the Dukes of Hazzard, the returns of
Annihilation?
What's that?
The character Annihilation.
Oh, Annihilation. Okay.
Released at the same time.
Wow. Huh.
The ultimate hero is ultimately the white female who would do anything to preserve the white male, who is, in this movie, in a sense, the Adam, the new man, the ultimate man.
Wow. And that fits with what Mr. Renegade is detecting in the recent seasons of Black Mirror. So I guess my guess is wrong, that the sort of side door or backdoor response from white supremacy is, okay, maybe we're not going to get to tell our stories of the white god quite all the time, but the giving more authority to the white female is a way of responding to that threat.
Exactly. Me too.
Yeah.
Caller at 2617. Thank you kindly. If other folks, the caller. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Kevorkian. Did you have something else you were going to add?
That's all I want to say is thank you for taking the time to explain your question and educate me and giving me the context to understand something there. So thank you.
Context. Appreciate that, caller at 2617. The caller at 9029. 9029. Did you have a question for Dr. Kevorkian? 9029.
Yeah, hello. May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes. One is more like a statement, and the other one is a question. Is also pretty much a statement as well. I agree with the caller that just.
You don't have a question
in regards.
You don't have a question.
I apologize. Not more of a question, but I watched Black Panther and
you're gonna have to make
of the radical.
You're gonna have to.
I'm trying to make it quick, guys.
Yes,
I apologize.
Yes. No apology needed.
Okay, so basically, what do you think about the character in relation to Killmonger and relating to Malcolm X, like as a Malcolm X kind of character, radical, as you said before, and T'Challa being kind of like that Martin Luther King character? Because that's kind of when I saw the film, that's what I kind of saw initially when, and I'm giving something away, when T'Challa's character was about to kill a white character and they stopped him in the middle of it. But Killmonger's character did it. You know, I'll mute my line. I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, thank you for highlighting that very specific illustration. That yes, you've got one character for whom it is possible in the course of justice that violence could be committed against white bodies, but then ultimately the triumphant, the one that's going to be the hero, is the one that would stop that action. And I hadn't thought of that very specific illustration of how the Malcolm X, by any means necessary, is going to be delegitimized in favor of one that would be safer, more protective of white bodies.
Appreciate that. I assume folks are good. If you have a quick question that you want to get into Dr. Kevorkian, you should get your hand up now. All the folks who are interested in Black Panther chatter, you will probably have to find an outlet other than the cows. I have no interest in that film at all. And even the people who said, "Oh my goodness, Gus, you don't even know about the film. You didn't research it." That is incorrect. I was reading the comic years before this movie came out, and I was looking at the comics saying, "Oh man, I have concerns about this. I don't know. This is not something that I'm ready to jump up and down and endorse." Be like, yeah, like I might be incorrect. Did Disney release this film? This is a Disney project, yes? Marvel, Disney, the Black Panther movie. Is that accurate, Dr. Kevorkian?
Well, I'm not sure. It's the Marvel universe, and it's a juggernaut, and I mean it's a vast empire. I don't know if Disney's involved, but I hesitate on that. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think I can double check. See, probably before we get out here.
Gus, I have one more question. Yes, it is Marvel Disney.
Okay, that's
I believe they've done like $13 billion in the franchise, from the Black Panther to the Captain America and Avengers, all of that all together. They've made a killing. I did have one more question if I could get it in.
Okay, hang on
with the Black Panther.
Amen. I just want to get this in. And I am a victim of white supremacy. I'm still learning. I could be in error, but even the framework of racists responding to Black Panther, I cannot process that. If this is a Disney project, if they're affiliated at all, then I strongly suspect that racist man, racist woman, racist child are having a huge role in this film. It's, in my view, it's the total other way around. The film itself is the response of racist man, racist woman. Non-white people are responding to this film by going and spending all this money to view it and to talk about it and everything, which is the same thing I thought last year with Get Out. That's why I have no interest. Like, even the time that we spent on it, that's about my saturation point. In fact, I think this is more time than I've spent on the Black Panther film in total, not the comic book, the film. This is more time than I've spent on the film, reading about it, talking about it at all, except listening to you all on the program, and there's been very little of that, thank goodness. Thomas in New York, you had your non-Panther related question.
Absolutely. Are you familiar, Dr. Kevorkian, with a string of bombings that's taking place in the Texas area against Black people?
Yes, I've been following that on the news, and I think the first was on May 2nd, and then there were a couple more just a couple days ago, and these were packages that, for people who are unfamiliar, that were left on people's porches, and they weren't from UPS or FedEx or anything, but the people brought them into their houses, and there was an explosion in the kitchen in one case. There have been a couple of deaths and one more woman in critical condition, but it has involved at least 3 non-white victims, and so it's there's not much more that is known about it. To talk about sort of predictable narratives. One of the first things was said was that, well, somehow it's involved with drugs or retaliation for a drug deal gone bad. Now the police are saying, oh, well, we had the wrong information about that. And the local leader of the NAACP, has pointed out, well, yeah, maybe that was not the right mistake to make to, immediately associate this. Well, if black people are being targeted, it must be drugs that are involved. Yes, so that's all. That's all I know. What did you have a thought about it or a question about this?
Yeah, I was. Thank you for adding your insight on that as well. I just want. Do you remember when Dylan Stormbooth shot up the church, Mother Emanuel Church, and around that same time, I believe like within the 24-hour to 48-hour period, it was like 11 black institutions that were either bombed, including I think an NAACP office. But it was a bunch of churches. Some that just got shot through them. A couple had been spray painted or damaged in some way. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I particularly remember the church shooting. Yes.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to. I was just framing the framework just to ask if we're in the middle of a race war right now. We've all seen Charlottesville, and my first question, the post-Obama, the Trump effect, like you said, those are pretty much the same thing. So are we in the middle of a race war, and black people just don't know it? And that was my last question. Thank you, Gus.
Yeah, thank you, sir. That's a serious question. I don't know about what the right terminology is for it, but we are definitely at a time where, as Gus says, when you have angry white people who are feeling they're losing their privilege and they're becoming desperate, and then you're talking about dangerous people. I mean, that was Mr. Renegade's, analysis of Suburbicon, but thinking about the implications for the real world, that there are some terrible things that white supremacists are doing, riding the wave of white resentment. So whether you want to call that a race war or not, it's a dangerous time, and it's time to take care.
I was going to comment, but Dr. Kevorkian took literally the words out of my mouth, except Gus T would not have used the word privilege. Whites feeling a loss of power, not privilege. The caller 6045, did you have commentary?
Yes, I was just enjoying the commentary, but I just wanted to... I wasn't able to watch Downsizing, but I did watch Suburbicon, and I thought it was I guess that's just a typical movie where it seemed like the black struggle was just slighted in not being able to observe our situation at that during that time. And I just wanted to ask the doctor, was he able to contrast this movie, because he said it was similar. These two movies were similar, but I wanted to know, have you seen The Shape of Water? Because it seemed to follow the same pattern as well. And I'll mute my line.
Oh, okay. I'll say that I did not see The Color, The Shape of Water. It's perhaps it's something that I should then check out and see if this pattern does exist there. But in terms of slighting the struggles of non-white people, I've already mentioned the fact that the father, Mr. Meyer, doesn't speak in this movie. The only time we see him mowing the lawn, and then one at a time we see him taking down the Confederate flag. But I'll say that in terms of the way that he's scripted and the way that he's kind of diminished as a character, we see him as a victim. We don't see him as someone who is given that kind of power to overcome. But this is a small detail, but when he's taking down the Confederate flag, he's wearing this shirt that's got these horizontal stripes on it. And I don't know if I was overreading it, but it almost looked to me like he was in a prison uniform. Like, the consequence of all this was that he was going to be blamed for all this violence, and he was going to be sent to prison for it. I don't know if that was meant to be kind of, in wardrobe, kind of prophetic, but it seemed to me that that was part of the way that his part in the justice struggle was being diminished, that he was being, in fact, criminalized even in the way that he was being shown, even in the action of just doing something as simple as taking down the Confederate flag that was defacing his home.
I will have to look at that frame again. Wow. I'll have to watch that frame, maybe pause it to see if he is indeed in a striped uniform going down to the conclusion of Suburbicon. Mr. Myers, that is. The person, 6946. Did you have a question for Dr. Kevorkian? Did I get you already? 6946. Did you have a question, or did I get you already?
No, Gus. Good evening, Gus. Good evening, Dr. Kevorkian. I have two questions, and they sort of go together. So, can I be heard, first of all? Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay. Two questions. So the first question I had, I haven't seen either of these films, nor have I watched the series, but I remember you saying in Suburbicon there was sort of this banter about asserting whiteness and this idea that, Matt Damon's family could be Jewish and they have to assert their whiteness. So I was wondering, do you think that's sort of a subliminal fear on the Coen brothers' part about, their surname, it connotes Judaism. I don't know if they're Jewish or not. I haven't really looked into their history, but do you think that sort of connotes a subliminal fear that they are not perceived as white enough? And then my second question would be, based on their films, I have seen quite a few of their films. It seems like their films seem to be asserting this whiteness. They celebrate white supremacy. In particular, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where you follow George Clooney as he escapes from prison, and in the end everything goes just fine. Everything is a happy ending for him, which would definitely not happen for a non-white person. Or The Big Lebowski, where you have this guy, the dude who just does nothing but bowl and smoke weed or whatever. So do you think that they're using their films to sort of assert their whiteness in celebrating sort of this culture of white supremacy? And I'll mute my line.
Thank you for both of those questions, which do indeed go together. In terms of the banter about whiteness and the possible assertion of a Jewish identity in Suburbicon, the way that I read that, on a conscious level, was the Coen brothers signaling that they were making common cause with an idea of racial justice. I think it could very well be subliminally, about asserting an anxiety about being marked as non-white. But it seemed to me that what they were saying is, look, this Suburbicon place with this Officer Hightower here who's making this racist joke, this is a racist place, and look how they are mistreating this black family that has moved in, and look how also implicitly this is probably, so to speak, an exclusive covenanted neighborhood where Jewish people are probably not welcome either. So I think there's a way in which they are thinking that this film is about making common cause with all of those things. Nevertheless, I think it's a problem in terms of its depiction that the black family is just the pure victim, although not much is cared for about them. But I wouldn't say it was so much about asserting whiteness, but I think it was intended as a way of talking about the history of exclusive social arrangements that historically have excluded both black people and Jewish people at the same time. I'll just say, you can get down to very fine-grained detail of different neighborhoods that excluded or included different things that did or did not count as white. Mr. Renegade knows this is an obsession of mine from way back, but, there were certain neighborhoods in California in the 20th century where Armenians couldn't own property. The Coen brothers in this Suburbicon very clearly send the signal that, yes, Armenianness is included in this covenant of whiteness, because there's a comment after the home invasion. They said, Mrs. Nigerian sent us flowers. So we know that Armenian people live in this neighborhood. What we also know, though, for sure, is that black people are not welcome there, and possibly because of this comment by the police officer, that Jewish people are not welcome there either. And I think this is insisting upon kind of a shared status as victims of racism in that instance. In terms of asserting whiteness and white supremacy, I think it's a good example to think of how they do it in Oh Brother, How Art Thou? Yes, you have sort of the godlike or heroic figure of George Clooney, who emerges triumphant, the shining white hero, modeled on Odysseus. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is modeled on the Odyssey, this classic of Western culture about the man of constant sorrows. Or in Homer's text, he's the man of skill. He's the guy who always figures it out. It's the role that Matt Damon usually plays, the guy who just outsmarts everyone. That's what Odysseus is all about. I will say that in the course of asserting that version of heroic whiteness, it nevertheless wants to make fun of, along the way, a kind of white trash, white supremacy. There's, in that film, you have the John Turturro character, whose classic line is, "You stole from my kin," right? All he can think about is his immediate family relationships and this idea of tight white kinship. And he's shown to be sort of powerless and limited. So it's playing a sort of smart, clever whiteness against an ignorant whiteness, and having one triumph over the other in that sense. So it's asserting a whiteness and asserting a white supremacy, but against a backdrop of sort of a white ignorance that is being mocked at the same time.
Appreciate that, Dr. Kevorkian. I think, I reckon if that did not answer her question, she can come back and let us know. If it did, then we should be good. Unless I see somebody get a hand up in the next, 30 seconds, I will assume that we nabbed all of our callers. In fact, what I'll do, I'll ask one question. That way I'll give folks an opportunity to get a hand up if they have anything else they want to touch on. One other thing that I did think was significant in Black Mirror, I thought it was just season 4, but then when I thought about the totality of the series, it seems pretty rampant throughout the anthology. Black males specifically, black people in general do not come out well in Black Mirror. Non-white people in general do not come out well in Black Mirror, but black males specifically seem to catch it really bad. I think from season 4, we already discussed the crocodile episode where the white woman goes on the murderous rampage. The black male gets his skull bashed in with a hammer twice. We have from the U.S. Callister episode where the black male, they lose their genitals in that episode. I thought that was significant, that in this world no one has genitals, so you have a mostly non-white group of people with no genitals, castration. But black male is in that group, and he's in real life, he's the intern that never gets promoted. He just fetches coffee and drinks for people. in the Metalhead episode. I think that's the 5th episode from season 4. There's one black male. He is the very first person to die, and he dies horribly. He's like shot twice and falls from like a 10-foot ladder, and the most gruesome possible death. And there even episode 2, Archangel. There's a poster up to Tusk, who is a black male from season 1, who suffered a violent death. He had a electronic drone basically bore into his skull, and it's the same pattern where you don't just die. You have violence in Black Mirror, but for black males, it's layers of violence, gratuitous violence. It's layers. Tusk is killed, which we see, and then after he's already dead, they're doing an autopsy on his body, and they put him in the machine, and the magnet sucks the drone back out of his skull. I think it sucks it through his eye, and then they show that again, so it's almost like he gets to be butchered, all over again. In addition to, in season 4, the Clayton character, who is executed like in perpetuity with this new technology that they have. It seems to be uniquely, specifically, the black male characters throughout Black Mirror, who, they just get all kinds of violent, extreme violence and torture. Just a parting thought on that pattern in the series, Dr. Kevorkian?
Yeah, I think it's most, to me, encapsulated in the Metalhead episode. I think it's pervasive. I want to make, if I may, just 2 comments. One about the genitals in the USS Callister episode. There was a moment that made me think, Mr. Renegade, of something that you'd insisted upon when we talked about the Purge, in which there's an impulse to emasculation and castration, but also then there's an insistence that black men in particular are supposedly obsessed with sexuality and distracted by it. You see the guys joking around in the store when they should be thinking about survival. In that Purge episode that you played the clip from, and you talked about the context of, was it Earl Butz, who talks about, black people being only serious about sex.
Great memory.
Yeah, so that's something I had to learn, because that's another one of those scenes that I just completely missed, so it made an impression on me. But in the USS Callister episode, in the Space Fleet modification, everyone is without genitals. But then at the end, they're restored to the regular version of the game. So you have all these avatars that suddenly are in the real game. They're out of that Space Fleet mod. And what you see when they snap out of the black hole or the whatever it is into this new reality, the first thing the black man does is he checks his pants, and the next thing he does is he looks at the black woman next to him. And it's suggesting that that's his very first thought was the restoration of his masculinity, and now he's just been free, he's just liberated from all this endless torment they've been through, but his immediate very first second thought is about having exerting his sexual relations. So I don't know if that was something that stuck out to you or not, but it seemed to me consistent with that idea of the one-track mind stereotype. But the Metalhead episode was the one that I wanted to say one more word about, if I could. It starts out, and I think it's very significant that it is black and white. It's shot in black and white in this very serious kind of, Schindler's List kind of way of this bleak landscape, and we're supposed to take it seriously. But it also very much emphasizes that racial aspect of the black and the white. And you have the white woman, she's driving, and the first thing she says, open one of those for us, to the black man. She's driving, so the first thing the black man has to do is he has to perform a service for her and give her a piece of candy and unwrap it for him. And then they start bantering about a pig society, and she says, well, a pig society would be an equal one, as if she's somebody who's thinking about equal societies. But what we see is that the society that she is in, even in this car, is not equal at all. It's not an accident. It's not just happenstance that the black man dies first. They get to this dangerous situation. They're going to raid the warehouse. And what happens? They send the black man out of the car to see if it's safe. He gets out, and the two white characters stay in the car while he gets out and he throws a rock and sees if there's any reaction. And then once the coast is clear, then the white woman and the white man follow. And then when they get into the warehouse, the white woman has the information. She's got this code, this 95 DY, whatever, box. But when she identifies, she points up to it and sends the black man up the ladder to retrieve it. And we find out that the whole thing is being done because she's doing a favor for her sister. So it's the white woman doing something for someone in her, presumably white, but the black man that's got to take all the risks. It's the black man that's got to have the candy for her, that's got to test to see if the coast is clear, and finally the black man who goes up the ladder to receive the object, and that's when he gets it from the dog. And I think it's significant that the dog is portrayed in this black and white as being a piece of black technology. This rabid killing dog, kind of like that Schwarzenegger Terminator that just keeps coming and coming after the white woman. So I think you have in this episode kind of a contrast of black technologies. You have the good black man who performs labor for the white woman and ultimately sacrifices himself. He allows himself to be killed by the metal dog. Before he dies, he says to the woman, "Go," and he lets the dog get him. So you've got the good, so to speak, black technology of the black man who serves and sacrifices himself. And then you've got the bad black technology, which is this murderous dog which single-minded pursuit comes after the white woman.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of the Terminator connection, the black machine that insatiably chases the white woman. I hadn't even... should have just went back and listened to the first time or read the book. If I had my library, I could have read Color Monitors in preparation. Then I would have had Terminator in mind when thinking of Metalhead. But that's a great connection, and I think relevant not only that episode is done in black and white, the only episode in the series done in black and white, but also that the climax when the white woman she kind of defeats the machine, kind of. In her moment where she kind of triumphs, she covers it with white paint. I told one of our listeners that I thought that was symbolically very important, that covering that black machine with whiteness is what allowed her to kind of, sort of win.
Absolutely. From Invisible Man, if it's optic white,
Gotta get in Ralph Ellison. Invisible Man. Bravo. I think, or I don't think, any new callers. I think we got all the hands. I think is the violence unique that we see, like in that we talked about with Metalhead and the Black Museum episode with Clayton, where he's again electrocuted in perpetuity. That's unique to black males in this series. Yes, this treatment.
Yeah. Yes. And the figure of the electrocuted black male, it's another one that's treated by Ellison in Invisible Man. The shock treatment. And that's, I'll just say all that about the claims about black intelligence. That's a part of that two-faced bad faith white supremacy. That on the one hand, there's the claim of inferior black intelligence. On the other hand, there are all rules and laws and devices that are designed to keep down and suppress and prevent the reality of black intelligence from expressing itself. In other words, if the white supremacists really believed that black people were not smart, then that idea of lobotomization would not be part of the fantasy, right? It wouldn't be necessary. If the white supremacists really believed that black people were unintelligent, then the laws against literacy in the time of Frederick Douglass, that you mentioned, those laws would not be necessary. Those are all proof of the bad faith and the self-consciousness of the lie that is being sold.
Keep that nigga running. Context of White Supremacy. Again, Dr. Martin Kevorkian, professor at the University of Texas, Austin. The book, his book, Color Monitors, the Blackface of Technology in America, in my view, might help one get a better understanding of some of the things that happen in the Black Mirror anthology. Not that you need to, take a weekend or month to binge watch any of Black Mirror or what have you, but I do know that it's popular. I do know a lot of people were watching it anyway, so if you have watched it, think critically about what you have seen. Those messages can have a big impact it can and do have a huge impact on how we think, speak, act, be very mindful. And one other thing, you can use these as great conversation pieces because I think a lot of, or certainly not as much as Black Panther, but I suspect a good number of folks have seen Black Mirror. Great way where you can engage in dialogue and talk about some of the episodes and some of the things that people may or may not have seen or thought about while viewing some of these episodes. Same thing for Suburbicon and downsizing. You could do the same thing for Black Panther. Gus T just is not, interested in those conversations. Much obliged for spending some of your time with us again, Dr. Kevorkian. Always a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. Any concluding thoughts you want to get in before we sign out?
No, I've spoken far too long already, and as your listeners are all too familiar, I'll talk around and then I'll finally figure it out sometimes what I want to say. So I'll just say again, thanks to your listeners for the patience, for hanging in there. Thanks for the excellent questions. Thank you, Mr. Renegade, for putting these texts together so productively and thoughtfully, selecting them for this conversation. And I appreciate it.
Pleasure was ours, Dr. Martin Kevorkian. Much obliged. If you check out any of the films, folks are diligent. They'll check the archives and then send notes on some of the films once they've had an opportunity to view some of the films and then check back in. So untiljustice@gmail.com if you are so inclined. We will be here tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, Workplace Racism, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Tune in. Looking forward to hearing if you have figured out some things that work. Fantastic. If you have problems, that's fine too. Call in. Looking forward to it. Thanks for everyone who tuned in live. Hope it was worthy of your time and energy with what you heard that's happening down in Texas, where Dr. Kevorkian is. The seriousness of racism, white supremacy, we do not have time to waste. That said, sobriety would be best under conditions of racism, white supremacy. Certainly, with warfare being waged, you do not want to be intoxicated and not able to be alert and thinking clearly about things that are happening around you. Certainly, if you are in a vehicle, you do not want to be under the influence and be stopped by Daniel Holtzclaw, any of these other race soldiers, badge or no, and have that be the time that you are under the influence. I think Dr. Welsing and many other folks that we esteem, they would co-sign and say, yes, let's stay sober. Let's do everything that we can to protect our brain computers so that we can come up with solutions, high-level thinking, new concepts to permanently solve the problem of white supremacy racism. That's it. And buckle up if you're going to be behind the wheel. I have to emphasize that consistently. Let's do everything we can to minimize contact with race soldiers. That's it. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other Black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of Black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another Black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.